long before Marika's golden light ever touched the lands between, before the Erd tree rose to cast its shadow across the world, there was another power, another order, and it was ruled by a figure whose very name has been all but scrubbed from history, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. The Godskins' origins trace back to this primordial sovereign, a being who commanded the power of destined death itself and who led an apostolic order dedicated to a singular, terrifying purpose, the hunting and flaying of gods. This isn't some footnote in Elden Ring's mythology, some obscure side quest you stumbled across in a hidden catacomb. This is foundational. The Godskins represent one of the most significant threats the Golden Order ever faced, a cult of god-slayers whose very existence challenged the supposed immortality of the divine, and their story stretches from the primordial age before Marika's ascension all the way to the moment you, the Tarnished, step into their lairs and face their last surviving apostles and nobles in combat. What makes the Godskins so compelling, so deeply unsettling, isn't just their grotesque aesthetic or their brutal fighting style. It's what they represent, proof that gods can bleed, that they can be stripped of their divinity, worn as a cloak, reduced to nothing more than skin stretched across the shoulders of their killers. The implications of that are staggering when you consider the entire cosmology of the lands between, the way the Golden Order constructed itself on the promise of eternal life, of an unbreakable hierarchy with Marika at its apex. The Godskins didn't just challenge that order, they predated it, and in doing so, they reveal that Marika's reign was built atop the corpse of something older, something she had to destroy to make room for her own vision of eternity. I think what fascinates me most about the Godskins is how thoroughly they were erased, how their queen was defeated, their power scattered, and yet they persisted, lurking in the margins of history, waiting in forgotten temples and crumbling ruins, still draped in the skins of gods they killed centuries or even millennia ago. They're like a wound that never fully healed, a reminder that the Golden Order's victory was never as absolute as Marika wanted the world to believe. And when the shattering came, when Marika's order collapsed into chaos and the demigods turned on each other in a war that tore the lands between apart, the Godskins saw an opportunity. They emerged from the shadows, not as a unified force but as scattered remnants, still dangerous, still hunting, still wearing the trophies of their ancient victories. By the time you arrive as the Tarnished, they're a dying breed, but they're far from powerless, and the few that remain are among the most formidable enemies you'll face. To understand the Godskins, to really grasp what they mean in the broader tapestry of Elden Ring's lore, you have to understand where they came from, who they served, and why Marika felt compelled to destroy them so completely that even their queen's name is barely a whisper in the world's memory. You have to understand the weapon they wielded, the black flame, a fire that didn't just burn flesh, but consumed the very essence of godhood, a flame that could kill what was supposed to be unkillable. You have to understand the rituals they performed, the way they didn't just defeat gods but unmade them, reducing divinity to a material object, a garment to be worn and discarded. And you have to understand the timeline, the way their story weaves through every major era of the lands between's history, from the primordial age before the Erd tree to the chaotic present where you, the Tarnished, walk among the ruins of fallen empires. This is a story about power and what happens when that power is challenged by something older, something that refuses to be forgotten. It's a story about the cycles of dominance and decline, the way new orders rise by destroying the old, and the way the old never quite disappears, never quite lets go. It's a story about gods who thought themselves invincible and the apostles who proved them wrong, who turned their divine flesh into trophies and their immortality into a lie. The Godskins are, in many ways, the dark mirror of the Golden Order itself. Where Marika promised eternal life and unchanging hierarchy, the Godskins offered the ultimate equalizer, the proof that no god is beyond death, no throne beyond toppling. And that's a dangerous idea, the kind of idea that had to be stamped out, buried, erased from every record and every memory. Because if people knew that gods could be killed, if they knew that divinity was just another kind of skin that could be peeled away, what would stop them from trying? What would keep the Golden Order's subjects in line, keep them worshipping at the Erd Tree's roots, keep them believing in Marika's eternal reign? The Godskins had to be destroyed, not just because they were a military threat, though they certainly were that, but because they were an ideological one, a living testament to the fragility of godhood. I theorize that this is why their erasure was so thorough, why the Gloam-Eyed Queen's name is never spoken in full, why the black flame was sealed away and its practitioners hunted to near extinction. It wasn't enough to defeat them. They had to be forgotten, reduced to myth, to cautionary tales whispered in the dark corners of the world. But here's the thing about erasure, it's never complete. There are always remnants, always survivors, always traces left behind in item descriptions and environmental storytelling, in the architecture of ruined temples and the designs of ancient armor. The Godskins left their mark on the lands between in ways that couldn't be fully scrubbed away. And if you know where to look, if you pay attention to the details scattered throughout your journey, you can piece together their story, reconstruct the history that Marika tried so hard to bury. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to trace the Godskins from their origins in the age of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, through their war with Marika and the Golden Order, into their long decline and scattered survival, and finally to their resurgence in the chaos following the shattering. We're going to examine who they were, what they believed, how they operated, and why they mattered so much that the most powerful god in the lands between felt compelled to wipe them from existence. Before the Erd Tree cast its golden light across the lands between, before Marika ascended to godhood and forged her eternal order, there existed a power so primal and so absolute that it could end the lives of gods themselves. You probably know the Godskins as those nightmarish bosses that appear in pairs, the ones with the stretching limbs and that unsettling ability to roll toward you like some kind of fleshy wheel. But what if I told you that these weren't just random enemies placed for difficulty, but the remnants of an entire religious order that once held the power to reshape the divine hierarchy itself? The story of the Godskins begins not with Marika's golden order, but in the shadows that came before it, in an age when immortality was not a promise, but a challenge to be overcome. We're talking about the primordial era here, the time before the Golden Order established its dominance. This is the deep history, the stuff that predates almost everything you encounter in the game's present. And at the center of this era stands a figure whose very title evokes something unsettling and ancient, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Now gloaming, that's the time of day when twilight deepens into night, when the world exists in that liminal space between light and darkness. It's not quite day, not quite night. It's transition, it's threshold. It's the moment when visibility fails and uncertainty takes hold. And this queen, this entity who emerges from the primordial darkness, she embodies that exact quality. We don't know her true name. We don't know where she came from or what she looked like beyond that singular, defining characteristic. Those eyes described as gloam-colored, dusk-colored, the color of endings. What we do know is that she possessed power, real, tangible, God-killing power. And that power came in the form of the black flame. The black flame is not just fire with a different color palette. This is important to understand. When you encounter black flame incantations in the game, when you see that dark, coiling fire that seems to burn with an inner hunger, you're witnessing something fundamentally different from the golden flames of the Erd tree or the red flames of the fire giants. The black flame has a unique property, one that the game tells us about directly. It can slay gods. More specifically, it reduces the maximum HP of its targets, a mechanical representation of something far more profound. This flame doesn't just burn the body, it burns the concept of immortality itself. But where did this power come from? Who granted the Gloam-Eyed Queen this ultimate weapon? This is where we enter the realm of speculation, but it's speculation grounded in what the game shows us about how power works in the lands between. Every major force, every significant source of divine authority seems to flow from somewhere. Marika's power comes from the greater will through the Elden Ring. The frenzied flame comes from the three fingers and its outer god. The scarlet rot flows from the god sealed beneath the lake of rot. Power in this world is granted, channeled, bestowed. So it's possible, I think it's even likely, that the Gloam-Eyed Queen received the black flame from an outer god of her own, some force that existed in opposition to, or perhaps in competition with, the greater will. There's another theory that's worth considering, though, one that's a bit more unsettling. What if the greater will itself granted her this power? What if the black flame was part of an earlier system, a previous attempt at ordering the world before the Golden Order? The greater will has shown itself to be, shall we say, willing to change its approach. It sent the Elden beast to the lands between. It chose Marika as its vessel. Who's to say the Gloam-Eyed Queen wasn't a previous experiment, a previous champion who served a purpose before being discarded? I theorize that the truth lies somewhere in that uncertainty, and honestly, that ambiguity feels intentional. The primordial era is meant to be murky, half remembered, a time before history was properly recorded or controlled by Marika's revisionists. What we can say with certainty is what the Gloam-Eyed Queen did with her power. She didn't hoard it. She didn't keep it to herself. Instead, she created an order, a religious and military organization dedicated to a single, horrifying purpose. She established the Godskin Apostles. The Apostles, these are the lean ones, the ones with the elongated bodies and the black robes that seem to be made from something that was once alive. And that's because they are. Those robes, that armor they wear, it's skin, God's skin, the skin of divine beings, flayed from their bodies and worn as both trophy and sacrament. The Gloam-Eyed Queen imbued these apostles with the black flame, granting them the ability to wield the same god-slaying power she possessed. They became her chosen assassins, her instruments of divine murder. Think about what that means for a moment. In a world where gods are meant to be eternal, where immortality is the defining characteristic of divinity, the Gloam-Eyed Queen created a force specifically designed to end that immortality. She looked at the natural order, at the hierarchy of divine beings, and said no. Or perhaps more accurately, she said nothing is permanent, nothing is truly immortal, and I will prove it. But the apostles weren't the only members of this order. As the Godskin faction grew, as their mission expanded, a second tier emerged, the Godskin Nobles. If the apostles are defined by their lean, stretched out forms, The nobles are their grotesque opposite. These are the fat ones, the swollen ones, the ones whose bodies seem to have consumed so much that they've become distended and massive. And I feel like that physical difference tells us something about their role. The nobles aren't just bigger, stronger versions of the apostles, they're something else entirely. Elite enforcers, yes, but also perhaps something more ritualistic. Their swollen forms might represent a kind of apotheosis within the Godskin order, a transformation that comes from consuming or absorbing divine essence. When you flay a god and wear its skin, what happens to the rest? What happens to the flesh, the power, the divine substance? Maybe the nobles know. The distinction between apostles and nobles suggests a hierarchy, a structure. This wasn't a chaotic cult. This was an organized religion with ranks and roles and specific functions. The apostles were the hunters, the assassins, the ones who moved through the world seeking their divine prey. The nobles were the guardians, the ritualists, the ones who held and consolidated power. And what was the core belief of this religion? What drove these Godskins to commit their acts of divine murder? They believed that by hunting and flaying the skins of gods, they could claim divinity for themselves. This is crucial. The Godskins weren't just killing gods out of spite or chaos. They were trying to ascend. They looked at the divine beings who ruled the world and thought that power can be taken, that immortality can be stolen, that godhood itself is transferable. It's a kind of sympathetic magic taken to its absolute extreme. Wear the skin of a god, and you wear its power. Consume the divine, and you become divine. The act of flaying wasn't just murder, it was transformation, transubstantiation, a sacrament written in violence. Where did they conduct these rituals? Where did they store the fruits of their hunts? The game gives us an answer, and it's one that connects the Godskins to a specific location that many players might not immediately associate with them. The Divine Tower of Caelid served as their base of operations. Now, when you visit the Divine Tower of Caelid in the game's present, it's a ruined, isolated structure in a land consumed by scarlet rot. You go there to restore Radan's great rune, and the place feels abandoned, forgotten. But that tower has a history, and that history belongs to the Godskins. This was where they brought the flayed skins of gods. This was where they conducted their rituals, where they practiced their dark arts, where they transformed divine murder into religious ecstasy. The tower itself, standing alone in what would become Caelid, suggests something about the Godskins' place in the world. They were separate, apart, operating outside the normal structures of divine society. And their targets? The Gloam-Eyed Queen commanded the Godskins to hunt minor gods and demigods, the lesser divine beings who populated the lands between before Marika's consolidation of power. This is really important to understand. The primordial era wasn't a time of monotheism or even a unified pantheon. It was polytheistic, chaotic, with multiple divine beings claiming power and territory. The world was full of gods, as big and small, major and minor, all competing for influence and worship. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's strategy was methodical. By targeting these minor gods and demigods, she was weakening the nascent pantheon from the bottom up. Each god slain was one less pillar supporting the divine order. Each flayed skin was a message. Immortality is a lie. Divinity can be stripped away, and we are the ones who will do the stripping. And the weapon that made this possible, the sacred instrument of the Godskins' faith, was the black flame itself. They revered it, worshipped it, saw it as the ultimate expression of their purpose. The black flame could do what no other force could. It could slay gods and defy their immortality. When an apostle struck a divine being with black flame, that god didn't just die. They died permanently, truly, with no resurrection, no return, no divine loophole. The flame consumed not just their body, but their immortal essence. The Godskins developed weapons and techniques to channel this power. The most significant of these was the Godslayer's greatsword, a massive coiled blade that looks almost organic, like a spine twisted into a weapon. This sword is imbued with the Black Flame's power, and its very name tells you its purpose. Not Godfighter, not God Battler, but Godslayer. The weapon exists for one reason: to end divine life. When you find this weapon in the game, when you read its description and see its unique design, you're holding a relic from this primordial era, a tool forged specifically for the murder of immortals. As the Godskins campaign continued, as more gods fell to the Black Flame and more skins were added to their collection, the Gloam-Eyed Queen's influence spread. And with that spread came a threat, a challenge to the emerging power structure that would eventually become the Golden Order. Because while the Godskins were hunting minor gods in the shadows, another force was rising. Another figure was gathering power and preparing to reshape the world according to her vision. Marika, the future Elden Lord, the one who would become the vessel of the Elden Ring and the face of the Greater Will's dominion, she was ascending. And she perceived the Godskins correctly as a direct threat to everything she was building. Think about it from her perspective. She's working to establish a unified divine order, to consolidate power under the Greater Will's authority, to create a stable hierarchy with herself at the top. And here's this rival power, this Gloam-Eyed Queen with her god-killing assassins, systematically dismantling the very pantheon Marika needs to rule over or replace. This wasn't a conflict that could be ignored or negotiated away. This was existential. Either Marika's Golden Order would rise, or the Gloam-Eyed Queen's black flame would consume it before it could even properly begin. So a shadow war began. Not the grand open conflicts that would later define the shattering, but something more covert, more personal. The Godskins began targeting Marika's allies, the gods and demigods who had sworn themselves to her cause or who represented potential pillars of her future order. Each assassination was both a tactical blow and a symbolic message. Your allies can die. Your supporters can be flayed. Your order is vulnerable. One particular incident stands out, one that the game hints at through environmental storytelling and item descriptions. The Godskins flayed the skin of a minor god in Liurnia, the land of lakes and academy sorcerers. This wasn't just another hunt. This killing left something behind, a cursed scar on the land itself. The act was so violent, so fundamentally wrong, that it marked the location permanently. When you walk through Liurnia in the game's present, you're walking through a land that still bears the wounds of the Godskins' primordial campaign, even if those wounds are now hidden under centuries of history and the waters of the lakes. This is what the Godskins represented in the primordial era. Not just a threat to individual gods, but a threat to the very concept of divine order, to the idea that immortality and godhood were permanent states. They were chaos incarnate, or perhaps more accurately, they were the embodiment of the principle that nothing, not even the divine, lasts forever. The black flame ritual, perfected through decades of experimentation and sacrifice, became something more than a weapon. It became a theology written in ash. The Godskins had learned to summon not just fire, but a fire that existed in defiance of the natural order, a fire that could unmake what the gods had made immortal. This wasn't the wild, consuming red flame of the fire giants, born from a fell god's rage. This was something colder, something more deliberate. The black flames coiled and twisted with an intelligence of their own, seeking out the divine spark within flesh and snuffing it out at the source. I think what makes the black flame so terrifying isn't just its destructive capacity, but its specificity. It doesn't burn indiscriminately. It hunts godhood itself, as if it can smell the difference between mortal meat and divine essence. The ritual required more than incantations and gestures. It demanded a vessel, a conduit who could channel the rune of death's authority without being consumed by it. The Gloam-Eyed Queen was that vessel, and through her, the Godskins became something unprecedented in the lands between, god killers with a methodology, a repeatable process for ending immortality. But power this absolute draws attention. It invites response. Marika the Eternal, still consolidating her rule, still weaving the threads of what would become the Golden Order, understood the threat the Gloam-Eyed Queen represented on a fundamental level. If gods could be slain, if immortality could be stripped away by ritual and flame, then Marika's entire project, her vision of an eternal golden age ruled by an unchallengeable pantheon, was built on sand. The rune of death, that fragment of the Elden ring that governed mortality itself, couldn't remain in the hands of someone who wielded it as a weapon against divinity. So Marika made a choice that would echo through every age that followed. She sent Malekith. Malekith, the Black Blade, Marika's shadow-bound beast, was no ordinary warrior. The Empyrean shadows, those enigmatic figures bound to potential gods by forces we still don't fully understand, possess a loyalty that transcends choice. It's woven into their very being, an unbreakable tether between shadow and master. Malekith was Marika's half-brother, her protector, her weapon, and when she commanded him to seize the rune of death from the Gloam-Eyed Queen, he moved with the inevitability of fate itself. I theorize that calling this a betrayal might be too simple, too human a word for what actually happened. The Gloam-Eyed Queen may have trusted in her own power, in the strength of her Godskin armies, in the authority granted by the rune of death itself. But trust doesn't account for the nature of an Empyrean Shadows bond. Malekith didn't choose Marika over the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Choice never entered the equation. The confrontation, when it came, must have been cataclysmic. We're talking about two wielders of death-aspected power, two figures who could end immortality, clashing in a battle that would determine the metaphysical rules of the world to come. Malekith's blade, destined death incarnate, against the black flame that could burn away godhood. The texts don't give us details, no epic poem describing the blows exchanged or the landscape scarred by their conflict. What we know is the outcome. Malekith seized the rune of death. He tore it from the Gloam-Eyed Queen's possession, claimed it in Marika's name, and in that single act, he didn't just defeat an enemy. He rewrote the laws of mortality in the lands between. With the rune of death sealed, bound into Malekith's blade, and later locked away within his flesh, the Black Flame's power began to wane. This is where it gets fascinating, because the Black Flame didn't disappear entirely. You can still find it, still wield it, still burn with it in the age we inhabit as tarnished. But it's diminished, a shadow of what it once was. The incantations remain, the knowledge persists, but the fundamental authority that made the Black Flame capable of true god-slaying has been severed at the root. It's like trying to run a machine after removing its power source. The mechanism still functions, the gears still turn, but the output is a fraction of what it once achieved. The Godskins discovered this weakness immediately, in the midst of their campaigns, in the middle of battles they had expected to win. Their flames still burned, still killed, but gods who should have fallen now survived. Immortals who should have been rendered mortal now endured. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's defeat followed perhaps inevitably, perhaps in that same climactic battle where Malekith claimed the Rune of Death. The sources are maddeningly vague on her ultimate fate, and I suspect that vagueness is intentional, a deliberate erasure by the Golden Order that came after. Was she slain outright, her body destroyed, her spirit scattered? So it's possible. Malekith certainly possessed the capability. But there's another theory, one I find compelling given the way Elden Ring treats death and immortality as malleable concepts. She may have been imprisoned, sealed away in some forgotten corner of the lands between, her power bound, but her existence preserved. The Golden Order has a habit of sealing rather than destroying what it fears. Look at the Elden Beast. Look at the way Marika herself ends up imprisoned within the Erd Tree. There's a pattern here, a preference for containment over annihilation. If the Gloam-Eyed Queen was an Empyrean, as many signs suggest, then killing her might not have been as straightforward as running her through with a blade. Empyreans are chosen by the two fingers, touched by the greater will's attention, and that touch leaves marks that transcend simple mortality. What we know with certainty is that the Gloam-Eyed Queen vanished from history, her name scrubbed from official records, her legacy reduced to whispers and fragments of forbidden knowledge. And with her disappearance, the Godskin Order shattered. The Godskin Apostles and Nobles, those warrior priests who had marched under her banner, who had flayed gods and worn their skins as sacrament, found themselves leaderless and hunted. The Golden Order, ascendant now, wouldn't tolerate their continued existence as an organized force. So they scattered. They became nomadic, solitary, remnants of a faith that had lost its divine anchor. This scattering wasn't a retreat exactly. It was more like a diaspora, a forced dispersion that turned a unified religious military order into isolated cells of true believers, each preserving what fragments of the old ways they could carry with them. Some Godskins retreated to the mountaintops of the giants, that frozen realm where the last survivors of another genocide made their stand against the Golden Order. There's a grim symmetry there, isn't there? The enemies of Marika's order finding common ground in the coldest, most inhospitable reaches of the lands between. In those mountains, hidden in caves and forgotten temples, the Godskins continued their rituals in secret. They preserved the black flame incantations, passed down the techniques of flaying and skinning, maintained the theological framework that justified their hunt for godhood. The mountaintops became a repository of forbidden knowledge, a place where the old ways survived in defiance of the new golden age being built below. Others found refuge in stranger places. The Windmill Village, that unsettling settlement in Altus Plateau, where women dance endlessly and flowers bloom in defiance of reason, became home to Godskins, who continued their practice of flaying sacrifices. The village itself feels wrong, saturated with a joy that curdles into horror the longer you observe it. The dancers move with manic energy, celebrating something that should not be celebrated, and beneath their festival lies the Godskin Apostle, still performing the old rituals, still peeling flesh from bone in twisted devotion to a queen who no longer commands them. I think what's happening in Windmill Village represents a kind of theological drift, a corruption of the original Godskin purpose. Without the Gloam-Eyed Queen's guidance, Without the clear objective of hunting gods, the rituals have become ends in themselves. The flaying continues not because it serves a greater purpose, but because it's all they know how to do. The devotion remains, but it's devotion without direction, faith without a living God to receive it. The divine tower of Kyled, once perhaps a stronghold or sacred site for the Godskins, was abandoned. The Godskin remnants there became dormant, waiting in the deep places, their purpose suspended but not extinguished. Kyled itself would later be consumed by scarlet rot, transformed into a hellscape of decay and madness. But even before millennia's bloom, the tower stood as a monument to a defeated faith. The Godskins who remained there entered a kind of hibernation, their bodies preserved by the strange durability their flayed skin garments provided, their consciousness reduced to a dim awareness of their duty. They would wake when disturbed, when intruders violated their sacred spaces, but otherwise they simply waited, patient as stone, for a restoration that might never come. But not all Godskins accepted solitary exile. The Godskin duo formed as a last alliance between an apostle and a noble, two exemplars of their respective ranks who refused to let the order die in silence. They positioned themselves as guardians, protectors of something precious, some fragment of their queen's power that survived her fall. In crumbling Farum Azula, that timeless city floating in a storm beyond conventional geography, the duo waits still. Their partnership represents something significant, I think. The apostles and nobles had distinct roles, different approaches to the sacred hunt. Apostles were lean, swift, acrobatic killers who stretched and twisted like serpents. Nobles were massive, heavily armored juggernauts who crushed through sheer overwhelming force. Together, they embody the full spectrum of Godskin martial theology, a living demonstration of what the order achieved at its height. The fact that they guard something in Farum Azula, a place where time behaves strangely and ancient powers linger, suggests that whatever fragment of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's legacy they protect is significant enough to warrant eternal vigilance. The Godslayer's greatsword, that colossal blade imbued with the black flame, was hidden away. Its location became a secret, its very existence fading into myth. The sword itself is a remarkable artifact, a weapon designed specifically for the purpose its name describes, slaying gods. The black flame coils along its blade, and its unique skill allows the wielder to impale enemies and burn them from within, a technique that mirrors the Godskins' theological approach to their hunt. But a weapon this dangerous, this ideologically opposed to the Golden Order's vision of eternal divine rule, couldn't be allowed to circulate freely, so it was buried, concealed, removed from the historical record. That it survives at all, that we as tarnished can eventually claim it, speaks to the incompleteness of the Golden Order's victory. You can erase names from books, you can hunt down practitioners of forbidden arts, but physical objects endure. They wait in the dark places, patient and silent, for hands willing to wield them. As the Godskin Order fragmented, splinter groups emerged with their own interpretations of the Black Flame's purpose. The Black Flame monks represent one such evolution, a group that preserved the Black Flame's teachings but divorced them from the explicitly god-hunting theology of the original Godskins. These monks, found in various locations, including the giant conquering hero's grave, practice Black Flame incantations and guard the knowledge jealously, but their focus has shifted. They're scholars of a sort, preserving a dangerous art, not necessarily to use it for its original purpose, but because they believe the knowledge itself is sacred, worth protecting regardless of the Golden Order's prohibitions. This is all just speculation, but I feel like the Black Flame monks might represent a more intellectual strain of resistance to the Golden Order's hegemony. They're not actively hunting gods, not flaying victims and wearing their skins, but they're maintaining a body of knowledge that fundamentally challenges the Order's authority. In a world where information is power and certain truths are forbidden, that act of preservation is itself a form of rebellion. The Golden Order, for its part, worked systematically to erase the Gloam-Eyed Queen from history. She was branded a heretic, her name struck from official chronicles, her deeds rewritten or attributed to other figures. This is where we see the Golden Order's approach to ideological control most clearly. It's not enough to defeat an enemy militarily. You have to defeat them narratively, erase them from collective memory, ensure that future generations don't even know there was an alternative to the Golden Rule. The Gloam-Eyed Queen represented a theological challenge to Marika's order, proof that gods could be held accountable, that immortality wasn't an absolute right, but a condition that could be revoked. That idea, more than any army, threatened the foundations of what Marika was building. So the queen had to become a non-person, a gap in the historical record, a name whispered only in the most forbidden texts. But erasure is never complete. Rumors persisted, passed down through generations of heretics and scholars who questioned the official narratives. Whispers that the Gloam-Eyed Queen's spirit lingered somewhere in the lands between, dormant but not destroyed, waiting for the black flame to reignite. These rumors might be nothing more than wishful thinking from the Order's enemies, the kind of messianic hope that defeated faiths cling to in the darkness. Or they might be true, in a world where death itself can be sealed away, where spirits persist in the spaces between life and true ending, where the very nature of existence is negotiable. The possibility that an Empyrean's essence could survive her physical defeat isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. The Gloam-Eyed Queen might be watching still, her consciousness reduced to a flicker of awareness, her power diminished to a spark, but her purpose unextinguished, waiting for a tarnished to claim the black flame, to wield destined death, to challenge the order that defeated her, and perhaps, in that challenge, give her the opportunity to return. The terror they sowed didn't end with their defeat. I think one of the most chilling aspects of the Godskins' legacy is how their practices, their methodology, their sheer brutality echoed through the ages that followed. The act of flaying, of wearing the skin of the divine, became something more than just a weapon. It became a symbol, a nightmare that cultures across the lands between would whisper about in the dark. You can feel it in the way the Golden Order speaks of them, in the revulsion that drips from every description we find. This wasn't just about stopping a threat. This was about burying a horror so deep that even mentioning it felt dangerous. The Godskin swaddling cloth survives as perhaps the most tangible remnant of their rituals. When you hold this relic, when you examine its description, you're touching something that was used in their most sacred, most profane ceremonies. The cloth was employed to wrap the flayed skins of gods, to bundle and preserve these divine hides, before they were fashioned into the raiment the apostles and nobles wore. It's not just fabric, it's a ritual object, imbued with purpose. The item itself grants a curious property, restoring health with successive attacks, and I believe this speaks to the Godskins' understanding of vitality, of the life force that coursed through divine flesh. They weren't just killers, they were students of immortality, trying to understand it by taking it apart, layer by layer. The swaddling cloth represents that methodical approach, that almost clinical precision in their butchery. It's a relic that later cultures would find and recoil from, yet some would recognize its power and dare to use it. And then there's the black flame itself. Here's where things get really interesting, because the flame didn't die with the Gloam-Eyed Queen's defeat. It couldn't. Destined death, even sealed within Malekith's blade, even locked away and guarded, left traces. The black flame's power was diminished, absolutely, reduced from the god-slaying inferno it once was to something lesser, something that could hurt, but perhaps not kill the divine as easily. But it lingered. Hidden embers remained scattered across the lands between, waiting in forgotten altars, in the memories of those who had witnessed its terrible beauty. You can find black flame incantations in your travels, and their descriptions often speak of this diminished state, this shadow of former glory. The scouring black flame, the black flame blade, these are echoes of what once was. They still carry that distinctive property, that percentage-based damage that eats through health regardless of defense. But it's muted now, controllable, no longer the absolute annihilation it represented in the hands of the Godskin Apostles at their peak. I theorize that this diminishment was intentional, a direct result of Malekith's sealing of destined death. When he bound the rune of death, he didn't just lock away the concept of mortality. He severed the black flame from its source, from the fundamental force that gave it the power to end gods permanently. What remained was a flame that remembered what it used to be, a fire that still hungered for divine flesh, but could no longer consume it completely. The places where the Godskins hunted, where they performed their rituals, where they dragged their divine prey, these locations didn't recover. They couldn't. The consecrated snowfield stands as perhaps the most obvious example. This frozen wasteland, blessed by some divine presence in ages past, became a hunting ground for the Godskins, and you can still feel their corruption there. The Spirit Caller Cave, hidden in that snowfield, houses Godskin Apostles even in the Tarnished's age, suggesting either that some survived in hiding or that something about that place calls to them, draws them back. The consecration, whatever holy purpose once sanctified that snow, was violated by their presence. I feel like the lands between is full of these cursed sites, locations where the membrane between the sacred and the profane was torn so violently that it never healed. The divine tower of Caelid, Volcano Manor's hidden chambers, the windmill village with its disturbing rituals, all of these places bear marks that could trace back to Godskin influence, to the age when hunting gods was not just possible, but practiced with religious fervor. Speaking of religious fervor, let's talk about what we don't know. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's true origins, her motives, her identity before she became an Empyrean, chosen by the Two Fingers, all of this is lost, and I don't think it's an accident. The Golden Order, once it consolidated power, once Marika established her reign as the one true god, engaged in what we might call historical revisionism on a cosmic scale. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they erased them. They rewrote the story. Every description we have of the Gloam-Eyed Queen comes filtered through the lens of Golden Order propaganda, through texts written by the victors who had every reason to paint her as a monster, as an aberration, as something that should never have been. But here's what nags at me. She was an Empyrean. The Two Fingers, those agents of the Greater Will, chose her. That means, at some point, the Greater Will itself saw potential in her, saw her as a possible vessel for a new age. So what changed? Was her rebellion against the gods always part of her nature, Or did something happen that turned her against the very order that elevated her? We'll probably never know the full truth, but the fact that it's been so thoroughly buried tells us something. It tells us the Golden Order feared not just her power, but her story, her version of events, the possibility that she might have had a point. What does survive, barely, are fragments, pieces of scripture, torn pages, half remembered prayers that hint at the Godskins' worldview. These fragments suggest something that I find deeply unsettling. The Godskins didn't see themselves as rebels or heretics. They believed they were fulfilling a destiny, enacting a prophesied apocalypse in which the gods would be slain and something new would emerge. The black flame ritual, their practice of wearing divine skin, all of it was liturgy to them, sacred acts in service of what they saw as an inevitable transformation. They believed in a destined god-slaying apocalypse, a twilight of the gods that would clear the way for a new order, perhaps one ruled by their Gloam-Eyed Queen, perhaps something else entirely. This eschatological vision, this belief in a necessary ending, it's not unique to the Godskins. You see echoes of it throughout the Lands Between's history, in the frenzied flames' desire to burn everything away, in Rani's plan to remove the gods' influence entirely, even in the Tarnished's potential to become Elden Lord and reshape the world. The Godskins were perhaps the first to articulate this idea, the first to act on it with such brutal conviction. Their scriptures, fragmentary as they are, suggest a cosmology where the age of gods was always meant to be temporary, a phase that would end in fire and flaying, giving birth to something beyond. As we move into the aftermath of their defeat, into the long centuries of the Golden Order's dominance, the Godskins don't disappear entirely. Their influence persists, threading through later conflicts like a dark current beneath the surface. We know that remnants of the Godskins, survivors or perhaps believers who adopted their practices, allied with other anti-Golden Order factions. The connection between the Godskins and Volcano Manor is particularly telling. Rykard, who rebelled against the Golden Order and sought to devour the gods themselves, surrounded himself with Godskin nobles. His manor became a haven for them. Was this just pragmatic alliance, or did Rykard see in the Godskins' old mission something that aligned with his own blasphemous ambitions? I think it's the latter. Rykard understood that the Godskins had nearly succeeded where he was only beginning, and he wanted that knowledge, that power, that willingness to commit absolute sacrilege in pursuit of godhood. The black flame ritual itself gets rediscovered. Heretics, those who rejected the Golden Order's doctrine, who sought power outside its sanctioned channels, they found the old methods. They pieced together the incantations, the techniques, the understanding of how black flame could harm the divine. The black flame monks of the Guardian's garrison, the heretics who wield black flame incantations you can learn, these aren't original Godskins. They're inheritors, practitioners who revived something that was supposed to stay buried, and they attempted, in their own way, to restore the black flame's god-slaying potential, to reconnect it to destined death, to make it once again the absolute weapon it had been. Whether any of them succeeded, even partially, is unclear. But the attempt itself shows how seductive that power was, how the promise of being able to kill a god drew people across centuries. Now let's address something that's pure speculation on my part, but it's speculation I can't ignore. Melina. The mysterious maiden who guides the Tarnished, who seeks to burn the Erd Tree, who in one particular ending reveals an eye that glows with a purple, gloam-like hue and promises to deliver destined death. Her title, Her purpose, the way she speaks of destiny and burning, it all echoes the Gloam-Eyed Queen. I'm not saying Melina is the Gloam-Eyed Queen reincarnated. That would be too simple, too neat. But there's a connection here, something intentional in the parallel. It's possible that Melina represents a fragment of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's purpose, a shard of that original mission to bring about an ending. It's possible she's a daughter, a creation, a spiritual successor. The game doesn't give us a clear answer, and maybe that's the point. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's legacy isn't just historical, it's active, present, woven into the very quest the Tarnished undertakes. When you, the Tarnished, arrive in the lands between, you find that the Godskins' legacy hasn't faded into comfortable myth. Their weapons resurface. The Godskin Peeler, the Godskin Stitcher, these aren't replicas or tributes. These are the actual instruments they used, preserved through the ages, still sharp, still hungry. Their spells, the black flame incantations, become available to you, teachable, learnable, as if the knowledge itself was waiting for someone willing to use it. You encounter Godskin Apostles and Nobles who are either impossibly long-lived or somehow renewed, standing guard in places of power, defending or perhaps waiting for something. The Godskin duo in crumbling Farum Azula is particularly significant. Farum Azula, that timeless crumbling city where Malekith guards destined death, where the boundaries of time seem fluid, that's where you find the two of them together, an apostle and a noble, working in concert. What are they doing there? Are they trying to reclaim destined death? Are they remnants from the original age, trapped in that place outside time? Or are they guardians of something else, some secret the Godskins left behind? The game doesn't tell us explicitly, but their presence in that specific location, so close to the sealed rune of death, can't be coincidental. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's era, this primordial age before the Golden Order's dominance, remains one of the darkest, most enigmatic chapters in the history of the lands between. It's a period we see only through fragments, through the items and enemies and environmental storytelling that survived the Golden Order's attempt to erase it. But those fragments paint a picture of an age when the gods were not secure, when immortality was not guaranteed, when an Empyrean and her chosen apostles nearly succeeded in fundamentally rewriting the rules of existence. The black flame burned, gods fell, and for a time it seemed possible that the entire cosmic order might collapse into twilight. That possibility never fully died. It was sealed, diminished, buried, but not extinguished. And as you walk through the lands between, in the age of the Tarnished, as you encounter the remnants of the Godskins, as you wield their weapons and cast their spells, you're touching that old possibility, that ancient threat. The Gloam-Eyed Queen may be defeated, her black flame may be diminished, but her legacy endures, waiting in the shadows, ready to burn again if given the chance. You've seen the Godskins hunt. You've watched them flay the divine and drape themselves in the remains of beings that were supposed to be untouchable. But what you might not realize is that this wasn't chaos. This wasn't random violence. For a time, the Godskins weren't heretics at all. They were the faithful, the chosen instruments of a god who wielded power that made even the immortal afraid. And when that god fell, when the black flame was sealed and the hunt was declared blasphemy, the entire trajectory of the lands between shifted. This is the story of how Queen Marika dismantled a rival order, how one battle between two champions rewrote the rules of divinity itself, and how the Godskins went from apex predators to hunted relics in hiding. As we move into the early Golden Order, into the era when Marika's reign was still consolidating, still stamping out every competing vision of what the world should be. We need to talk about the Gloam-Eyed Queen, not as a mythic figure from the distant past, but as a present and immediate threat to everything Marika was building. Because by this point, the Gloam-Eyed Queen wasn't just a cult leader or a minor demigod with delusions of grandeur. She was an Empyrean, a being chosen by the greater will itself as a potential vessel for godhood, and she commanded a force that had proven it could kill the unkillable. The Gloam-Eyed Queen rises during this period, not in the sense that she suddenly appears. We covered her origins in the previous era, but in the sense that her power reaches its zenith. Her influence spreads. The black flame she wields, that twisting fire that burns with a darkness deeper than any shadow, becomes synonymous with divine death. And this is crucial to understand. The black flame isn't just fire that happens to be black. It's flame imbued with destined death, the principle that allows true mortality to touch even gods. When the Godskins hunt under her banner, when they peel the skin from a fallen god and wear it as a trophy, they're not just desecrating a corpse, they're proving a theological point. They're demonstrating that divinity is not absolute, that the so-called eternal can be rendered into meat and hide. The Godskins, under her leadership, become something terrifying in their efficiency. We're talking about a coordinated campaign here, not isolated incidents. They hunt gods, plural, and the fact that we find Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles scattered across the lands between, in places of former power, in divine towers, in ancient temples, in the very heart of places that once belonged to other orders, that tells us something about the scope of their reach. Each skin they claim is a god who will never return. Each flayed hide stretched across their frames is a permanent erasure, because without destined death in play, without the black flame to make death stick, gods could presumably return or regenerate or persist in some form. The Godskins don't just kill, they finalize. And this brings us to the problem. Queen Marika is in the process of establishing the Golden Order, a system built on very specific principles: eternal life for the gods, the Elden Ring as the absolute source of order and law, the Erd Tree as the symbol of unassailable divine power. And here's the Gloam-Eyed Queen, an Empyrean with just as much claim to legitimacy as Marika herself, running a parallel operation that fundamentally contradicts everything the Golden Order stands for. The existence of the Black Flame, the existence of a force that can grant true death to the divine, it undermines the entire foundation of Marika's vision. How can you promise eternal golden rule when there's a flame that makes eternity negotiable? So Marika perceives the Gloam-Eyed Queen not just as a rival, but as an existential threat. I think this is important to emphasize because it's easy to read this as simple political rivalry, one queen versus another, but it's deeper than that. It's a clash of cosmologies. Marika's Golden Order requires the removal of destined death from the world. It requires that death becomes something controllable, something that happens to the unworthy, the tarnished, the lowly, but never to the gods themselves. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's entire doctrine is the opposite. Her power is proof that gods can and should die, that divinity is not a permanent state, but a condition that can be revoked with the right application of flame. Marika's solution is characteristically direct. She doesn't negotiate. She doesn't attempt diplomacy or integration. She tasks Malekith with ending this. And Malekith is the perfect instrument for this task because he's not just powerful, he's bound to Marika in a way that makes disobedience impossible. He's her shadow-bound beast, a half-brother given to her by the greater will itself as both protector and enforcer. The relationship between an Empyrean and their shadow is one of absolute loyalty, mystically enforced, and Malekith's entire purpose is to be Marika's Fang, the violence she cannot or will not commit herself. When Malekith and the Gloam-Eyed Queen clash, we're talking about a battle that reshapes the metaphysical landscape. This isn't a skirmish. This isn't a duel in some forgotten corner of the world. The fact that this confrontation is remembered, that it echoes through item descriptions and NPC dialogue even ages later, tells us this was monumental. Two champions, each wielding aspects of the Elden Ring's power, each representing incompatible visions of divine order, meeting in combat to decide which vision survives. The details of the battle itself are lost to us, and I think that's deliberate on From Software's part, but we know the outcome. Malekith defeats the Gloam-Eyed Queen. He doesn't just win a fight, he strips her of her power, and this is where things get really interesting because of what happens next. Malekith doesn't destroy the Black Flame, he seals it. He takes destined death, the very principle that makes the Black Flame lethal to gods, and he binds it within himself, or more specifically, within a rune that he guards with his life. This becomes the Rune of Death, and from this moment forward, Malekith's entire existence revolves around ensuring it never escapes his custody. The Black Flame, once a divine force capable of ending gods permanently, becomes something lesser. It's still dangerous, still potent enough that the Godskins we encounter can use it to devastating effect, but it's a shadow of what it was. The flame that remains is Black Flame without the full weight of destined death behind it. It can burn, it can kill mortals and lesser beings, but it can no longer finalize divine death the way it once could. The sealing is imperfect in the sense that the knowledge and the techniques survive, but the metaphysical authority is gone, and this is where the Godskins' world collapses. They lose their divine mandate in an instant. Everything they were, everything they believed themselves to be, it's retroactively rewritten as heresy. The Golden Order doesn't just defeat them militarily, it defeats them theologically. Marika's propaganda machine, and make no mistake, the Golden Order is as much about controlling narrative as it is about controlling territory, brands the Godskins as heretics, as blasphemers who dared to raise their hands against the rightful gods. The fact that the Godskins were doing this under the banner of an Empyrean, that they had their own claim to divine sanction, that's erased. It's forgotten or deliberately obscured. The Gloam-Eyed Queen herself, the figure who commanded all of this, her fate becomes one of the great mysteries of Elden Ring's lore. She's imprisoned or banished. The text is deliberately vague here, and I theorize that this ambiguity is intentional because her final fate might be something we've already encountered without recognizing it. Some players speculate she became Melina. Others think she might be sealed in some hidden location we haven't discovered, and still others believe she was killed in a way that didn't require destined death, perhaps reduced to a powerless state that's functionally equivalent to death for a being of her stature. What we know for certain is that she vanishes from the active stage of history. Her name is lost or suppressed. The Golden Order doesn't preserve the memory of its enemies, it erases them. The Godskins, leaderless and branded as enemies of the New Order, do the only thing they can. They scatter. They retreat into hiding, and this explains so much about where and how we find them in the game. They're not organized anymore. There's no central command, no coordinated strategy. The Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles we encounter are survivors, holdouts, fanatics who refuse to abandon the old ways, even though their god is gone and their cause is lost. They hole up in ruins, in forgotten temples, in places the Golden Order hasn't bothered to fully cleanse because they're too remote or too unimportant. Some of them, I think, go into a kind of hibernation or stasis. The way Godskins can appear in multiples, the way they seem almost like they're guarding locations that have no strategic value in the present day, it suggests they're operating on old orders, old imperatives that no longer make sense in the current age. They're waiting for something that's never going to come, a return of their queen or a resurgence of the Black Flame's true power, and in the meantime, they're just obstacles, dangerous remnants of a failed revolution. Marika, for her part, doesn't stop at military victory. She solidifies the Golden Order's dominance by erasing traces of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's influence wherever she finds them. This is cultural genocide, the systematic dismantling of a rival tradition. The Godskins' temples, their strongholds, the places where they once gathered to worship and to plan their hunts. These are either destroyed outright or repurposed. The Golden Order is efficient in this regard. Why waste a perfectly good structure when you can just replace the idols, rewrite the inscriptions, and claim it was always yours? We see evidence of this throughout the lands between. Divine towers that once might have served the Gloam-Eyed Queen's purposes are now integrated into the Golden Order's infrastructure. Temples are rededicated to Marika or to the Erd Tree. The physical landscape is rewritten to support the new narrative, and within a generation or two, most people probably don't even remember there was an alternative. The Golden Order becomes synonymous with divinity itself, and anything that contradicts it is heresy by definition. The Black Flame's power diminishes in this era, not just because it's sealed, but because the knowledge of how to wield it fully is suppressed. The Godskins still practice their techniques. They still coat their weapons in black flame and hurl it at their enemies, but it's a pale imitation of what the Gloam-Eyed Queen commanded. The incantations we find, the black flame spells that we as players can learn and use, these are fragments, echoes of a greater whole that's been deliberately shattered. And this is one of the tragedies of this era. An entire theological tradition, an entire approach to understanding divinity and death is reduced to scraps and whispers. What strikes me most about this period is how thoroughly the Golden Order wins. This isn't a narrow victory. This isn't a situation where the Godskins retreat to fight another day. They're broken, scattered, and erased from official history. And yet, the fact that they survive it all, the fact that we encounter them centuries or millennia later, still practicing their arts, still wearing their flayed godskins, that speaks to a kind of resilience that even Marika couldn't fully extinguish. The Godskins become ghosts, haunting the margins of the world, and their presence is a reminder that the Golden Order's dominance was never as absolute as it claimed to be. As we delve deeper into this pivotal era, you start to see the tectonic plates of power shift dramatically. With the Black Flame's raw, unbridled power now contained, the Godskins, once the apex predators of the lands between, found themselves in an untenable position. I theorize that for a time, a deep, unsettling silence must have fallen over their remaining enclaves. Without the divine impetus of the Black Flame, without its scorching touch to imbue their blades and incantations, their primary modus operandi, the hunting of gods, became quite simply impossible. Think about it. Their entire identity was forged in the crucible of this destructive power. What happens when that crucible cools? This is where we see a subtle yet profound transformation within their ranks. It's not an immediate capitulation, but rather a desperate clinging to what little remained. The Godskins, I believe, began to worship the remnants of the black flame in secret. It wasn't the roaring inferno they once commanded, but perhaps a lingering ember, a faint warmth, a memory of its terrible glory. This wasn't a public, triumphant veneration, but a clandestine, almost mournful ritual. Imagine hushed ceremonies in hidden caves, whispers echoing through forgotten catacombs, as they desperately sought to rekindle a spark that had been so decisively extinguished. This shift from wielding power to revering its ghost marks a critical turning point in their tragic narrative. Meanwhile, the architect of their downfall, Malekith, remained steadfast in his new, grim duty. He became the eternal guardian of destined death, ensuring the black flame remained sealed. His existence, from this point forward, was one of perpetual vigilance, a lonely sentinel standing between the lands between and utter annihilation. He was, in essence, the lock on a cosmic Pandora's box. This act of sealing wasn't just a moment in time, it was a continuous, active suppression. I think it's crucial to understand that Malekith's role wasn't passive. He wasn't merely holding a key, he was actively exerting his power to prevent the black flame from ever reemerging in its full, devastating capacity. This ongoing containment directly impacted the Godskins, ensuring their power vacuum remained precisely that, a vacuum. Concurrently, the Golden Order, now firmly established and led by Queen Marika, was not merely content with victory, it sought absolute dominion. The Golden Order spreads its influence, suppressing other religions and heresies with a ruthless efficiency that belied its golden facade. This wasn't just about winning a war, it was about rewriting history and establishing a singular, undeniable truth. Any belief system that deviated from the tenets of the Erd Tree and the greater will was systematically dismantled, its followers persecuted, its symbols defaced. This period saw an aggressive expansion of Golden Order dogma, a kind of spiritual colonialism that sought to homogenize faith across the lands between. This aggressive expansion had a direct and devastating impact on the Godskins. Their hunting of gods ceased as they no longer possessed the Black Flame's divine power. This wasn't a choice, it was an enforced reality. Without the ability to truly harm a god, their raison d'etre evaporated. They became hunters without prey, warriors without a weapon. It's a profound loss of identity, a forced retirement from their very purpose. I feel like this must have been an incredibly disorienting time for them, a period of existential crisis where their entire worldview was shattered. What do you do when the very thing that defined you is taken away? The Golden Order's campaign of erasure extended to the very memory of their vanquished foes. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's name is erased from history, known only in whispers. This isn't just about winning, it's about controlling the narrative. The victor writes history, and in this case, the Golden Order meticulously scrubbed away any trace of their greatest adversary. Her name became taboo, a forbidden utterance, relegated to the darkest corners of lore, passed down in hushed tones by those few who dared to remember. This act of historical revisionism is a powerful tool of control, ensuring that future generations would only know the Golden Order's version of events. I believe this deliberate act of forgetting is as impactful as any military defeat, effectively neutralizing the Queen's legacy and preventing any potential resurgence of her ideology. In the wake of such overwhelming suppression, the Godskins' remnants formed small, isolated cults preserving their traditions in secret. They were no longer a unified, formidable force, but fractured fragments, scattered like ashes in the wind. These cults were not about conquest or power. They were about survival, about holding on to a sliver of their heritage against an all consuming tide. Think of them as historical archivists, guardians of a forbidden past, meticulously passing down their rituals, their prayers, their understanding of the black flame, however diminished. This is where the true resilience of a belief system is tested, not in its moments of triumph, but in its darkest hours of persecution. Simultaneously, Marika's Golden Order establishes the Erd Tree as the central symbol of faith. This wasn't just a tree, it was a living monument to their power, a beacon of their divine authority. Its golden leaves, its towering presence, its very essence permeated every aspect of life in the lands between. It became the focal point of worship, the source of grace, the ultimate representation of the greater will's dominion. This deliberate elevation of the Erd Tree served to further marginalize any competing belief systems, cementing the Golden Order's spiritual monopoly. It's an incredibly potent symbol, one that I think is often underestimated in its psychological impact. You cannot escape the Erd Tree. It is everywhere, a constant reminder of who holds power. As the Golden Order solidified its control, the Godskins' once feared reputation fades into obscurity. The legends of their terrifying power, their god-slaying prowess, became mere whispers, then distant echoes, and eventually just forgotten tales. This isn't a sudden event, but a gradual erosion, a slow fading from the collective consciousness. The propaganda of the Golden Order would have actively worked to diminish their image, perhaps even demonizing them further to justify their eradication. I feel like this loss of reputation, this descent into obscurity, must have been a profound humiliation for a people who once commanded such fear and respect. To be forgotten, in a way, is a second death. The Black Flame's ceiling marks the end of the Godskins' era of dominance. This is the definitive line in the sand, the moment when their reign truly concluded. Before this, they were a major player, a force to be reckoned with. After, they were a shadow, a memory, a cautionary tale. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an existential collapse. Their entire foundation was built upon the Black Flame, and without it, their empire crumbled. This moment, I believe, is the true turning point in their history, from ascendancy to decline. And indeed, the Gloam-Eyed Queen's defeat becomes a cautionary tale for those who oppose the Golden Order. Her fate served as a stark warning: defy the Golden Order, and you will not only be defeated, but your very memory will be expunged. It was a powerful deterrent, a psychological weapon wielded by Marika to ensure compliance and prevent future rebellions. Her story, twisted and distorted by the victors, became a tool of control, a narrative designed to instill fear and discourage dissent. It's a classic move by any dominant power, transforming a formidable adversary into a bogeyman. In their desperation to preserve their heritage, the Godskins' artifacts and relics are hidden away, guarded by loyal followers. These weren't just trinkets, they were tangible links to their past, to their power, to their identity. Their distinctive skin peeler weapons, their unique armor, their ritualistic implements, all became sacred trusts, secreted away in forgotten places, protected by those who still held faith. This act of preservation is a testament to their enduring belief, a quiet defiance against the Golden Order's attempts at total eradication. I think it shows a deep conviction, a refusal to let their history simply vanish. But the Golden Order was relentless. The Golden Order's Inquisition actively hunts remnants of the Godskins. This wasn't a passive cleanup operation, it was an organized, systematic persecution. Special units, perhaps some form of early Black Knife assassins or similar enforcers, would have been tasked with rooting out any lingering pockets of Godskin worship or influence. They would have interrogated, tortured, and executed, leaving no stone unturned in their quest to completely sanitize the lands between of this heresy. This is the brutal reality of power consolidation, where dissent is not tolerated and eradication is the goal. Despite this relentless pressure, the Godskins' influence wanes, but their belief in the Black Flame persists. This is the enduring paradox of their story: physically diminished, politically irrelevant, yet spiritually unbowed. The flame may have been sealed, but the belief in its power, in its ultimate return, remained a burning ember in the hearts of its most devoted followers. It's a testament to the power of faith, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Their numbers may have dwindled, their power may have vanished, but the core of their ideology, the belief in the Black Flame, continued to flicker. This quiet, persistent faith would, I believe, be the seed for their eventual, albeit limited, resurgence. What will become of these scattered remnants clinging to a forbidden faith? We'll find out as we move into the next phase of their tragic saga. But the defeat of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, as decisive as it was, didn't erase her from history entirely. Far from it, I think. Her legacy, though fractured and fragmented, persisted. We find echoes of her reign and the terrifying power she wielded in cryptic texts and oral traditions that even in the Golden Order's zenith refused to be fully silenced. Imagine hushed whispers around campfires, forbidden scrolls hidden deep within forgotten libraries, or perhaps even coded messages woven into children's lullabies. These weren't overt declarations of rebellion, no. They were subtle, almost subconscious, ways for the memory of a different, darker age to endure. I theorize that this lingering presence, however faint, was a constant nagging reminder to Marika and her burgeoning Golden Order that their dominion, while vast, was not absolute, nor was it eternal. It's a testament to the sheer impact the Gloam-Eyed Queen had, that even in defeat, she couldn't be entirely expunged. With their queen vanquished and their power severely curtailed, the Godskins, those terrifying apostles of the Black Flame, were forced to adapt. They couldn't simply vanish. Their numbers, though diminished, were still significant, so they adopted a nomadic lifestyle, becoming wanderers, always on the move, always seeking to evade detection by the ever-watchful eyes of the Golden Order. Think of them as spectral remnants, flitting through the shadows of the lands between, their once proud banners replaced by tattered cloaks, their grand temples abandoned for hidden caves and forgotten ruins. This wasn't just about survival, it was about preserving their identity, their faith, and the very essence of what made them Godskins. Every step they took was a silent defiance, a refusal to be assimilated into the New World Order. They were, in a sense, living monuments to a fallen age, their very existence a quiet protest against the Golden Order's burgeoning dominance. And that dominance, it grew exponentially. The Golden Order, under the unwavering hand of Queen Marika, expanded its reach, its influence, and its dogma across the entirety of the lands between. It wasn't just a political or military expansion, it was a spiritual one. The Golden Order became the sun around which all other faiths were forced to orbit, or simply be consumed. This wasn't merely about establishing control, It was about rewriting the spiritual landscape of an entire continent. Marika's vision was clear: a unified faith, a singular understanding of the divine, with the Erd tree at its heart. Any deviation, any lingering belief in older gods or forgotten powers, was seen as a threat, an impurity to be purged. I believe this period marks a critical turning point where the diverse spiritual tapestry of the lands between began to unravel, replaced by the golden threads of Marika's singular truth. Naturally, in this new golden hued world, the Godskins' once sacred rituals, steeped in the power of the black flame and the flaying of gods, could no longer be performed openly. They were driven underground, literally and figuratively. These acts of worship, once grand and terrifying spectacles, became secret ceremonies, whispered incantations performed in the deepest, darkest corners of the lands between, far away from prying eyes. Imagine the contrast: the radiant public splendor of the Golden Order's ceremonies, bathed in the light of the Erd Tree, versus the clandestine, desperate rituals of the Godskins, lit only by flickering torchlight, their prayers barely audible above the wind. This transformation from public devotion to hidden practice speaks volumes about the Golden Order's effectiveness in suppressing rival faiths. It wasn't just about winning battles, it was about controlling narratives, dictating what was acceptable belief, and pushing anything deemed heretical into the shadows. The sealing of the Black Flame itself was perhaps the most crucial step in solidifying the Golden Order's control over life and death. Remember, the Black Flame was a power that defied the very concept of immortality, a force capable of slaying even gods. By sealing it away, by rendering it inert, Marika effectively removed the ultimate challenge to her authority and the Erd Tree's dominion. This wasn't just a magical feat, it was a philosophical statement. It declared that the Golden Order, and by extension Marika herself, held the keys to both life and its ultimate cessation. No longer could gods be truly slain, they could only be defeated. This distinction is vital, I think. It meant that the cycle of rebirth and immortality, central to the Erd Tree's power, could continue uninterrupted, unchallenged by the finality the Black Flame represented. It was the ultimate consolidation of power, both temporal and spiritual. Despite this monumental setback, the remnants of the Godskins, those who clung to the old ways, did not despair. Their devotion, if anything, intensified. They continued to seek ways, however desperate or futile they might seem, to restore the Black Flame's power. This wasn't just about vengeance, it was about their very identity. The Black Flame was not merely a weapon, it was a conduit, a spiritual anchor, a symbol of their purpose. Without it, they were incomplete. So they scoured ancient texts, performed forbidden experiments, and perhaps even sought out forgotten pacts. This relentless pursuit, this unwavering hope in the face of overwhelming odds, is what truly defines the Godskins in this era. They became a living prophecy, a constant, if quiet, threat lurking in the background, a reminder that the Golden Order's victory, while absolute in the present, might not be so in the distant future. It's a narrative thread that, as we'll see, stretches far into the future of the lands between. The defeat of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, in essence, solidified Marika's position as the unchallenged ruler of the lands between. With the most potent threat to her divine authority neutralized, her ascent was complete. She wasn't just a queen, she was the queen, the divine sovereign, the ultimate arbiter of fate and faith. This victory wasn't just a military triumph, it was a spiritual coronation. It allowed her to fully implement her vision for the Golden Order, to reshape the very fabric of society and belief. No longer did she need to contend with a rival goddess, a dark mirror reflecting a different path. The path ahead was clear, golden, and singularly her own. This period, I believe, is where Marika truly becomes the figure we know from the legends, the unassailable deity at the heart of the Erd Tree. Paradoxically, as the Godskins' power waned, their cults, though growing smaller in number, became even more fervent in their devotion. When you're an underdog, when your beliefs are suppressed, the commitment often deepens. This isn't just a fringe phenomenon, it's a psychological truth. The shared persecution, the secrecy, the constant threat of discovery all served to forge stronger bonds among the remaining Godskins. Their faith became purer, more distilled, stripped of any superficial adherence. They weren't just followers, they were true believers, willing to sacrifice everything for the restoration of their queen and the Black Flame. This intensity, this unwavering zeal, is what allowed their cults to survive, to persist against all odds, even as the world around them actively sought to erase them. Consequently, the Golden Order's dogma became the dominant belief system across the lands between, permeating every aspect of life. From the grandest cathedrals to the humblest villages, the teachings of the Erd Tree were omnipresent. This wasn't just about religious conversion, it was about cultural hegemony. Laws were based on Golden Order principles, art depicted its deities, and even daily rituals reflected its tenets. It became the default, the accepted truth, the very air that the inhabitants of the lands between breathed. Any deviation was met with suspicion, then re-education, and ultimately, if unyielding, with force. This wasn't a gentle persuasion. It was a systematic, comprehensive imposition of a single worldview. And in this new world, the Godskins were anomalies, relics of a past that the Golden Order desperately wanted to forget. Thus, the Godskins' once great empire, a dominion built on fear and the power of the Black Flame, was reduced to scattered, hidden enclaves. Their grand fortresses, their sprawling territories, all were lost to the relentless march of the Golden Order. They became a people without a land, a faith without a public temple, a shadow lingering at the edges of a bright new era. These enclaves, I imagine, were more than just hiding places. They were bastions of resistance, places where the old ways were secretly practiced, where the memory of the Gloam-Eyed Queen was kept alive, and where the hope for the Black Flame's return continued to flicker. They were small, yes, but resilient, like embers waiting for the right wind to rekindle a forgotten fire. Ultimately, the era of the Gloam-Eyed Queen and the Godskins, in its full, terrifying glory, became a forgotten chapter in history, at least to the common folk. It wasn't actively erased from memory so much as it was overshadowed, relegated to the dusty corners of ancient lore, dismissed as myth or legend. The Golden Order was so successful in establishing its narrative that the previous age, with its dark gods and terrifying powers, simply faded into obscurity. Most people, born under the benevolent light of the Erd Tree, would have no concept of a time when death itself could be slain, when gods were flayed, or when a queen of twilight held sway. This act of forgetting, this collective amnesia, is perhaps the Golden Order's greatest triumph. It allowed them to build their new world on a clean slate, free from the inconvenient truths of the past. But as we'll see, history, especially in the lands between, has a funny way of resurfacing, often when you least expect it. You thought you knew the Golden Order, right? A beacon of light, a symbol of unwavering power, a force that simply was. But what if I told you that even at its absolute zenith, its supposed unassailable peak, shadows were already stirring, plotting its downfall from within? We're not talking about minor squabbles here, but a deep seated ancient hatred simmering just beneath the surface. This isn't a story of open rebellion, but of a long game, a slow burn played by entities whose patience stretched across centuries. I believe this is where the true genius of the Godskins lies, a resilience often overlooked in the face of their more flamboyant, fire slinging reputation. As we move into the next chapter of our timeline, we find ourselves firmly entrenched in the height of the Golden Order, a period where Marika's influence seemed absolute. Remember how we left the Gloam-Eyed Queen, defeated, her power seemingly neutralized? Well, that wasn't the end of her followers, not by a long shot. The Godskins, once the terrifying enforcers of divine judgment, masters of the devastating black flame, were forced to retreat. This wasn't a surrender, though, not in the way you might imagine. It was a strategic withdrawal, a calculated move into the shadows, following their crushing defeat at the hands of the nascent Golden Order. They had lost the war, yes, but not their spirit, and certainly not their ambition. I think it's crucial to understand this distinction. They weren't broken, merely biding their time. During this era, Marika's Golden Order truly reached its zenith, its golden rays, a metaphorical extension of the Erd Tree's grace, stretched across the entirety of the lands between. Power was consolidated with an iron fist. Dissent was not just suppressed, but actively purged, and any lingering whispers of older gods or different paths were systematically erased or recontextualized. The Golden Order presented itself as the singular, undeniable truth, and for many, it was. But even as the Golden Order cemented its dominance, the Godskins, those devoted disciples of the vanquished Gloam-Eyed Queen, were secretly preserving their ancient traditions. This wasn't just about holding on to old rituals, it was about safeguarding the very essence of their identity, passing down the forbidden knowledge of the black flame through generations, whispering its secrets in hushed tones, away from the prying eyes and zealous purges of the Golden Order. I theorize that this period of forced introspection and secrecy actually strengthened their resolve, forging a tighter, more dedicated core of believers. It's often in adversity that true conviction is born, don't you think? To evade detection, these remnants of a bygone era established hidden strongholds in remote, often forgotten locations. One of the most significant of these was the Ge'ez Divine Tower of Kalids. Now, when you think of divine towers, you probably picture grand, accessible structures, monuments to the Greater Will or the Two Fingers. But Kalid's tower, even then, was different. It was a place of isolation, its very nature lending itself to secrecy. I believe its desolate surroundings and the general aversion to Kalid, even in its less blighted state, made it an ideal sanctuary for those who wished to remain unseen. These strongholds weren't just hideouts, they were academies, temples, and armories all rolled into one, places where the flame could be tended, the doctrines studied, and the next generation of Godskins trained in the arts of their forebears. However, a critical change had occurred that deeply impacted their power. The black flame, once a symbol of divine destruction, an unholy fire that consumed gods, was significantly weakened. This wasn't due to any inherent flaw in the flame itself, but rather a direct consequence of Marika's actions, the sealing of the Beatstone. Suitland of Death. The Rune of Death, or Destined Death as it is also known, was not merely a concept, but a tangible, potent force, an aspect of the Elden Ring itself. By sealing it away, Marika fundamentally altered the natural order, removing true death from the equation. The Black Flame drew its ultimate power from this rune, its ability to slay gods stemming directly from its connection to destined death. With the rune sealed, the flame could still burn. It could still inflict grievous wounds, but its divine, god slaying potency was severely curtailed. It was like trying to fuel a raging inferno with damp kindling. The fire was there, but its intensity was diminished. Despite this profound weakening, the Godskins continued to perform their rituals. They maintained their connection to the diminished black flame, not just out of tradition, but out of a desperate hope for its eventual restoration. Imagine the devotion required, the sheer faith to continue worshiping a power that had been so dramatically kneecapped. They saw it not as a defeat, but as a temporary setback, a test of their loyalty. These rituals, I believe, were as much about maintaining their own spiritual fortitude as they were about invoking the flame itself. They were a defiant declaration, a silent promise that their goddess and her power would one day return. Within this clandestine organization, the Godskin Apostles and Nobles emerged as key figures. These weren't just high-ranking priests. They were the strategists, the leaders, the ones who kept the flame of defiance alive. They led covert operations, not yet open warfare, but subtle acts designed to undermine the Golden Order. Think of it as a war of attrition, fought in the shadows, eroding the foundations of Marika's reign piece by piece. Their methods were insidious, their movements unseen, their motives often misunderstood by those outside their immediate circle. They were the long-term planners, the ones who understood that a direct confrontation was suicide, but that a slow, steady erosion of faith and power could eventually lead to victory. A crucial part of their strategy involved gathering followers. Who would join such a seemingly defeated cause? Those disillusioned with the Golden Order, of course. The Golden Order, for all its glory, was not without its detractors. Its strict dogma, its suppression of alternative beliefs, and its often brutal enforcement of its will created a fertile ground for resentment. The Godskins offered an alternative, a promise of a return to an era of divine retribution, a world where the old gods held sway, and the current oppressive order would be brought to its knees. They preyed on discontent, offering a vision of justice that resonated with those who felt wronged or marginalized by Marika's reign. This wasn't just about power, it was about tapping into a deep-seated desire for change, a longing for a different kind of truth. Simultaneously, the Godskins embarked on a crucial intellectual and spiritual endeavor. They studied the remnants of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's power. This wasn't just about nostalgia, it was a pragmatic quest. They sought to understand the mechanics of her divine authority, to analyze the lingering echoes of her might, all with the ultimate goal of restoring the black flame to its former strength. They were, in a sense, spiritual archaeologists, meticulously sifting through the debris of their past glory, searching for clues, for forgotten spells, for any scrap of knowledge that could reignite their god-slaying fire. I feel like this shows a remarkable intellectual curiosity, a willingness to learn and adapt even in the face of immense pressure. Their covert operations extended to infiltrating sacred sites of the Golden Order. Why? To gather intelligence and resources, of course. They weren't just lurking in forgotten corners, they were actively probing the defenses of their enemy. The Beats, Mountaintops of the Giants. For instance, a region steeped in ancient power and home to the remnants of the fire giants would have been a prime target. What secrets did the Golden Order keep there? What ancient artifacts or forgotten lore might be hidden beneath its snowy peaks? The Godskins, ever resourceful, sought to exploit any weakness, any oversight, any forgotten corner where valuable knowledge or powerful relics might lie undisturbed. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about understanding the enemy better than they understood themselves. Within the confines of the divine tower of Kylid, the Godskin Apostles conducted even more secretive ceremonies. These weren't just prayers, they were defiant invocations of the Black Flame, acts of rebellion against the Golden Order. Imagine the sheer audacity, the courage it must have taken to openly worship a forbidden power in a place so close to the heart of their enemy's domain. These ceremonies were acts of spiritual warfare, a constant reaffirmation of their faith, a declaration that the flame, though diminished, still burned in their hearts. They were, in essence, keeping the pilot light lit, waiting for the day they could turn up the gas. But the Godskins were not alone in their resentment of the Golden Order. They forged alliances, recognizing that unity, even among disparate groups, could be a powerful weapon. They sought out other marginalized factions, those who shared their animosity towards Marika's reign. Among these were the Kays, fire monks, custodians of the ancient flame of the giants, a power diametrically opposed to the Erdtree's golden grace. They also allied with the Azamor Knights, an ancient lineage of warriors whose frigid powers stood in stark contrast to the warmth of the Golden Order. These alliances weren't born of shared ideology, but of shared grievances, a common enemy uniting otherwise disparate forces. I think this demonstrates a pragmatic flexibility on the part of the Godskins, a willingness to set aside differences for the greater strategic goal. And then, the ultimate discovery, the one that would truly change the game, the Godskins discovered fragments of the Rune of Death, hidden by Marika herself. This wasn't just a lucky find, it was the culmination of their tireless efforts, their relentless searching, their unwavering belief. Marika had sealed the rune, yes, but she couldn't erase it entirely. Like a shattered mirror, its pieces remained, scattered and hidden. The Godskins, with their deep understanding of the Black Flame's connection to destined death, were uniquely positioned to recognize these fragments for what they were. This discovery was a monumental turning point, a flicker of hope in their long, dark vigil. With these fragments in hand, they began to experiment with its power. This wasn't about immediate restoration, it was about understanding, about learning to manipulate the very essence of true death. What would they do with such a terrifying power? And what implications would this have for the future of the lands between? The stage, my friends, is being set for something truly cataclysmic. As we continue our descent into the shadowed annals of history, we find the Godskins, already a potent, if nascent, threat, beginning to truly solidify their opposition to the burgeoning Golden Order. This is still firmly within the Golden Order's peak, a time when its influence was spreading like wildfire across the lands between, yet even then, pockets of resistance flickered. We know they were already clashing with the Fingerslayer blade wielders, those shadowy figures with a singular, terrifying purpose, to sever the influence of the two fingers, the outer god emissaries that guide the tarnished. I theorize that these Fingerslayer blade wielders, with their almost surgical precision in targeting divine authority, saw the Godskins' ambition to restore the Gloam-Eyed Queen as a dangerous, albeit different, manifestation of that very authority. It's a fascinating dynamic, isn't it? Two groups, both in opposition to the Golden Order, yet fundamentally at odds due to their differing interpretations of divine power. This isn't just a simple case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's far more nuanced, far more Elden Ring. Moving beyond these initial skirmishes, the Godskin Nobles, those portly, powerful figures you've likely encountered in your own journey, began to take a more direct and provocative stance. They initiated a series of daring raids on Golden Order caravans. These weren't just random acts of banditry. I believe these were calculated strikes designed not only to acquire resources, but more importantly, to undermine the Golden Order's perceived invincibility. They weren't just stealing gold or supplies, they were specifically targeting sacred artifacts, objects imbued with the very essence of the Erd Tree's grace and the Golden Order's tenets. Imagine the psychological impact. A caravan, laden with symbols of the Golden Order's power, suddenly ambushed, its sacred contents plundered, and its guards flayed alive. This wasn't just about theft, it was about spreading terror, about sowing seeds of doubt among the Golden Order's adherents. It was a declaration of war, written in blood and fear. It was during this period of escalating conflict that the Godskins made a pivotal discovery. They uncovered ancient texts, forgotten scrolls, and brittle parchments detailing the rise and, crucially, the fall of the Gloam-Eyed Queen. This wasn't just historical curiosity, this was a revelation. These texts, I surmise, provided not only a historical blueprint, but also a theological justification for their existence. They learned of her dominion over the Black Flame, her ability to slay even gods, and the circumstances of her eventual defeat at the hands of Malekith, the Black Blade. This knowledge, though this unearthed history, didn't just inform their understanding, it ignited their determination. It fueled their resolve to restore her legacy, to bring back the era of the Black Flame, to once again wield a power capable of challenging the Golden Order at its very core. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The very act of seeking to destroy the Golden Order led them to the forgotten truths that empowered their cause. Naturally, such overt acts of defiance and the growing influence of the Godskins did not go unnoticed. The Golden Order, in its infinite wisdom, deployed one of its most formidable assets, the Crucible Knights. These ancient warriors, clad in their distinctive crucible armor, were among the first champions of the Erd Tree, embodying a primordial form of the Golden Order's power. Their loyalty was absolute, their fighting prowess legendary. And so, across the vast and varied landscapes of the lands between, skirmishes erupted. You can almost picture it. The agile, flaying movements of the Godskin Apostles, their black flame dancing against the stoic, unyielding charges of the Crucible Knights, their weapons wreathed in ancient draconic power. These weren't decisive battles, not yet, but rather a series of brutal, often localized clashes. Each encounter was a test of strength, a clash of ideologies, and a grim foreshadowing of the larger conflict to come. But the Godskins were not merely brute force, they were also cunning. They understood that to truly dismantle an empire, you must first understand its inner workings. And so, they established a sophisticated network of spies within the Golden Order itself. These weren't just random informants. I believe these were individuals strategically placed, perhaps even disillusioned members of the Golden Order, or those who simply saw an opportunity for power in the coming upheaval. Their mission was clear: to gather intelligence, to uncover the Golden Order's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Where were its supply lines weakest? Which commanders were susceptible to bribery or fear? What were its strategic deployments? This intelligence, I theorize, was invaluable, allowing the Godskins to plan their raids with greater precision, to evade capture, and to anticipate the Golden Order's movements. This isn't just about combat, it's about information warfare, a chess match played with lives and ideologies. With their intelligence network established and their determination rekindled by the ancient texts, the Godskins felt ready for a bolder move. The Godskin Apostles, those lithe and terrifying figures, undertook a ritual in the divine tower of Kyled. This wasn't just any ritual, this was an attempt to reignite the Black Flame's full power, to restore it to its former glory, to the destructive potential it held when wielded by the Gloam-Eyed Queen. The divine towers, as you know, are places of immense power, often connected to the very fabric of the cosmos. Caelid's tower, in particular, with its desolate and corrupted landscape, seems a fitting stage for such a dark endeavor. I imagine the air crackling with dark energy, the screams of sacrifices, the chanting of ancient incantations, all culminating in a desperate plea to an outer god, or perhaps just to the dormant power within the black flame itself. And for a time, it worked. The ritual partially succeeded. The black flame, which had been diminished, its true power sealed away by Malekith, began to stir. Its destructive capabilities were partially restored, allowing the Godskins to wield it with greater efficacy, to inflict more grievous wounds, to inspire even greater fear. This was a triumph, a validation of their efforts, a tangible sign that their queen's legacy could indeed be resurrected. But every action has a reaction, especially in the lands between. The surge of dark energy, the reawakening of such a potent, forbidden power, did not go unnoticed by the Golden Order. It was like a beacon, a flare in the night, drawing the attention of those sworn to uphold the Erdtree's dominance. The Golden Order, now fully aware of the Godskins' growing threat and the resurgence of the Black Flame, dispatched its forces with renewed vigor. This wasn't just about skirmishes anymore. This was a concerted effort, a full-scale hunt. Legions of knights, sorcerers, and even the formidable clean-wrought knights, loyal to millennia, were likely deployed. The lands between became a battlefield, with the Golden Order relentlessly pursuing the Godskins, seeking to extinguish the Black Flame once and for all. Tensions escalated dramatically. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, every path a potential ambush. The Godskins, for all their renewed power, were still vastly outnumbered by the Golden Order's unified might. Faced with overwhelming opposition, the Godskins made a strategic retreat. They pulled back, deeper into their hidden strongholds, fortifying their defenses against the inevitable Golden Order incursions. These strongholds, I imagine, were not just simple caves or ruins, but intricately designed refuges, perhaps built into the very roots of the Erdtree itself, or deep within forgotten catacombs. They became bastions of defiance, places where the Godskins could regroup, heal their wounds, and plot their next move, all while the Golden Order hammered at their gates. This period was one of consolidation, of survival, but also of desperate innovation. It was during this period of intense pressure and isolation that the Godskins began to experiment with grafting techniques. This is where things get truly disturbing, truly Elden Ring. They weren't just content with their own inherent power, they sought to enhance it, to push the boundaries of what was possible. They began combining their own flesh with divine remnants, with pieces of slain gods or demigods, or perhaps even fragments of the Erd tree itself. This wasn't just about strength, it was about absorbing power, about literally becoming more divine, more formidable. Think of the grafted scion, or Godric the Grafted, and you get a sense of the grotesque ambition at play. I theorize that this was a desperate measure, a last resort to bridge the power gap between themselves and the Golden Order. The results were likely monstrous, but undeniably potent, creating new, terrifying forms of Godskin warriors. Emboldened by their new, grafted powers and desperate to turn the tide, the Godskin Nobles, those relentless leaders, conceived of a daring, almost suicidal assault. Their target, the Erd Tree's roots. This wasn't just a symbolic attack. This was an attempt to strike at the very heart of the Golden Order, to weaken its foundation, to sever its connection to the greater will. Imagine the sheer audacity of such a plan, to burrow deep beneath the earth, past countless defenses, to assault the very source of the Golden Order's power. It was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice, but one they felt compelled to take. They believed that if they could cripple the Erd Tree, the Golden Order would crumble. However, the assault failed, spectacularly and tragically. The Erd Tree's defenses, both natural and magical, proved too formidable. The Golden Order, likely forewarned by their spies or simply prepared for such a desperate move, met the Godskins with overwhelming force. The nobles, despite their grafted power, suffered heavy losses. This wasn't just a setback, it was a devastating blow, a major defeat that further weakened their already precarious position. Their numbers dwindled, their resources strained, and their morale undoubtedly plummeted. The dream of restoring the Gloam-Eyed Queen seemed further away than ever. Defeated but not entirely broken, the remaining Godskins regrouped once more in the divine tower of Caelid. This tower, which had once been the site of their partial triumph in reigniting the black flame, now became a place of somber reflection and desperate planning. The air was thick with the weight of their losses, the sting of their failure, and within their ranks, dissent began to brew. Some questioned the wisdom of their leaders, others the efficacy of the black flame itself. The unity that had once bound them began to fray, threatening to tear the Godskins apart from within. What would become of them now, battered and besieged, with their grandest gamble having failed so spectacularly? The future for the Godskins looked bleak indeed. As we move deeper into the Golden Order's undeniable peak, a subtle but profound shift begins to ripple through the Godskin ranks. You might think, given their history of open warfare, that they'd be chomping at the bit for another direct confrontation. But I believe, and the lore seems to support this, that their earlier defeats had instilled a potent sense of strategic caution. Some of the more pragmatic voices, particularly among the Godskin Apostles, began to advocate for a return to covert operations. This wasn't a retreat born of cowardice, I theorize, but a calculated pivot. They understood the sheer, overwhelming power of the Golden Order at this juncture. To strike openly would be suicide. However, within the same breath, there were other factions, perhaps younger, more hot-headed, or simply less scarred by past failures, who pushed vehemently for open rebellion. This internal tension, this push and pull between stealth and direct assault, is a fascinating dynamic that defines much of their activity during this era. It's a classic organizational dilemma, isn't it? How do you fight an enemy you can't defeat head on. This strategic debate, however, was soon overshadowed by a discovery of immense significance. Through their clandestine networks, their whispers in the dark corners of the lands between, they stumbled upon a revelation: the location of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's sealed tomb. This wasn't just any tomb. This was the resting place of their progenitor, the very source of their power, hidden deep within the treacherous, snow-blasted expanse of the mountain tops of the giants. Think about the implications of this. For generations, her legacy had been a myth, a legend, a whispered prayer. Now she was real, tangible, and perhaps reclaimable. I imagine the sheer electrifying hope that must have surged through the Godskins. This wasn't just about restoring their former glory, it was about resurrecting their very foundation. This discovery, I believe, unified many of the fractured factions, at least temporarily. The allure of reclaiming the Gloam-Eyed Queen's power was a powerful motivator, overriding for a time the internal squabbles about tactics. With this newfound objective, the Godskins launched a covert expedition to the tomb. This wasn't a grand army marching across the landscape. It was a surgical strike, a clandestine infiltration. They moved with the silent efficiency of predators, cloaked in the shadows of the mountains, their black flame flickering only when absolutely necessary. Their goal was clear: reclaim her power, restore their former glory. But the mountain tops of the giants are not a welcoming place, even for those who embrace the chill of death. They encountered fierce resistance, not just from the indigenous giants, who viewed any intrusion into their sacred lands with brutal hostility, but also from the Golden Order's guardians. The Golden Order, ever vigilant, had established outposts and patrols even in these remote reaches, perhaps sensing the lingering darkness that clung to the mountains. This resistance, I theorize, was unexpected in its ferocity and effectiveness. It significantly delayed their progress, turning what they hoped would be a swift retrieval into a protracted, bloody struggle. Every step forward was paid for in blood and sacrifice, a testament to the Golden Order's pervasive reach and the giants' territorial ferocity. Despite the setbacks, the expedition pressed on, driven by the unwavering conviction that their salvation lay within that sealed tomb. And eventually, after enduring countless skirmishes and navigating treacherous terrain, they succeeded. Deep within the tomb, they uncovered ancient relics tied directly to the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Imagine the scene: the hushed reverence, the flickering torchlight illuminating objects of immense power. Among these were her scepter, an artifact imbued with her will and her power, and perhaps most crucially, remnants of her black flame. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a reawakening. The black flame, which had dwindled to a mere ember in the absence of its mistress, now had a tangible connection to its source. It's possible that these remnants weren't just inert objects, but still held a spark, a resonance of her original power. I feel like this moment was a turning point, not just for the expedition, but for the entire Godskin sect. They had found the missing pieces of their identity. With these sacred relics in hand, the Godskins began a painstaking process of integration. They didn't just hoard them, they incorporated them into their rituals, their prayers, their very being. The scepter became a focal point for their ceremonies, a conduit for their revived faith. The remnants of the black flame were nurtured, coaxed back to life, and gradually, through these dedicated efforts, the black flame's potency began to be restored. This wasn't an overnight transformation. It was a slow and arduous process of rekindling a dying ember. But with each successful ritual, with each flicker of renewed power, their belief in their queen, and in their own destiny solidified. I believe this period was crucial for their morale, transforming them from a scattered, defeated cult into a force with renewed purpose and a growing, tangible power. This restoration of the Black Flame wasn't just about destructive capability, it was about spiritual renewal, about reclaiming their identity as the chosen wielders of death. However, even with the resurgence of their power, internal strife continued to plague the sect. The very act of reclaiming their queen's power brought forth new debates, new questions about their future. What was the best course of action now that their flame was rekindled? Should they immediately launch into open war or continue their shadowy existence, building strength? This is where the ideological divisions within the Godskins truly began to crystallize. The initial unity forged by the quest for the tomb began to fray under the weight of strategic disagreements. It's a common pattern in organizations, isn't it? A shared goal can unite, but once that goal is achieved, the different philosophies about what comes next often lead to new conflicts. It was during this period of renewed power and internal debate that a radical proposal emerged from the Godskin Nobles. These were the more politically astute, perhaps more ambitious members of the sect. They proposed an alliance with the outer gods, seeking their aid in overthrowing the Golden Order. This was a bold, almost desperate move. The outer gods are cosmic entities of immense, often terrifying power, and their motives are rarely benevolent. To seek their patronage was to invite unimaginable consequences. I theorize that the nobles, perhaps seeing the Golden Order as an insurmountable obstacle through conventional means, were willing to gamble with forces beyond their comprehension. They saw it as an expedient solution, a way to tip the scales decisively in their favor, even if it meant compromising their own principles. This wasn't just about power, it was about desperation, a willingness to embrace any means necessary to achieve their ultimate goal. But this proposal was met with fierce opposition, particularly from the Godskin Apostles. These were the more traditional, perhaps more spiritually grounded members of the sect. They rejected the proposal outright, fearing the consequences of invoking the outer god's power. They understood the inherent dangers, the potential for manipulation, the risk of becoming mere puppets in a cosmic game. Their devotion was to the Gloam-Eyed Queen and the Black Flame, not to some alien entity. I believe they saw this as a betrayal of their core tenets, a dangerous shortcut that could lead to their ultimate undoing. This wasn't just a disagreement over tactics, it was a fundamental clash of ideologies, a battle for the very soul of the Godskin sect. The apostles, having witnessed the slow, painful rebuilding of their power, understood the value of purity and self-reliance, while the nobles, perhaps more impatient, sought immediate, overwhelming force. The chasm between these two factions proved too wide to bridge. The sect fractured. Some members, swayed by the promise of overwhelming power, broke away to pursue their own agendas, perhaps seeking out these outer gods directly, or forming alliances with other dark forces. This fracturing wasn't a sudden, violent schism, I believe, but a gradual drifting apart, a quiet dissolution of unity. It left the core Godskin organization weaker, but perhaps also more ideologically pure, retaining those who truly believed in the path of the Gloam-Eyed Queen and the Black Flame. This internal strife, while damaging, also served to refine their purpose, stripping away those who sought power at any cost. Despite these internal struggles and the loss of some of their numbers, the Godskins continued to operate in the shadows. They had reclaimed a significant portion of their power, but the Golden Order remained dominant. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that the time for open war had not yet come. So they waited. They honed their skills, perfected their rituals, and meticulously planned for the day when the Golden Order would inevitably falter. They became masters of infiltration, assassination, and subtle manipulation, their presence a whispered threat in the dark corners of the lands between. They were patient, deadly, and utterly devoted to their queen. This era, then, is one of quiet resurgence, of simmering resentment, and of meticulous preparation. They were biding their time, awaiting the right moment to reclaim their former glory, to unleash the full, terrifying power of the Black Flame upon a world that had forgotten to fear them. And as we move into the next chapter, you'll see just how effectively they capitalized on that patience. So we've just talked about the ancient past, the Godskins' initial defeat, and their long, quiet slumber. But what happens when the world itself shatters? As we move into the next chapter, we arrive at a pivotal moment, one that recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about power in the lands between, the shattering. This isn't just a war, it's an existential crisis, a cosmic tremor that reverberates through every corner of the world, and it's precisely this chaos that breathes new life, or perhaps I should say, new fire, into the dormant Godskin cult. I believe this is where their true, terrifying potential begins to unfurl once more. You see, for millennia, the Golden Order, Marika's dominion, held sway. It was the bedrock of reality, or so everyone believed. But then it fractured. The Elden Ring, the very symbol and source of its power, was broken. And with that cataclysmic event, the Golden Order, this seemingly unshakable institution, destabilized. I theorize that this wasn't just a political upheaval, it was a spiritual rupture, a weakening of the very fabric of belief that had kept the Godskins suppressed for so long. Imagine a dam breaking, not just releasing water, but releasing a forgotten ancient evil. That's the vibe I get from this period. In the aftermath of this cosmic divorce, the Godskin Apostles and Nobles, these ancient skin-wearing zealots, sensed it. They felt Marika's influence wane, like a dying ember in the vast darkness. This wasn't a conscious decision made by a council of elders. I feel like it was an instinctual awakening, a primal recognition that their moment had finally arrived. For ages, they had been in hiding, tucked away in forgotten corners of the world, stewing in their resentment and nurturing the embers of their faith. But now, the world was ripe for their return. They emerged, not with a grand fanfare, but with a creeping dread. From their secret strongholds, places that had become mere legends or forgotten ruins to most, they began to stir. The divine tower of Kyled, a towering monument to a forgotten age, became a beacon for their resurgence. It's perched on the edge of that blighted landscape, almost a perfect metaphor for their corrupted ideology. And then there are the windmill villages, those seemingly innocuous, almost pastoral settlements. But beneath that veneer of rustic charm, I believe they were hotbeds of Godskin activity, places where their dark rituals could be performed away from prying eyes, where the skin of their victims could be flayed and prepared in grotesque devotion. This is all just speculation, of course, but the juxtaposition of these locations, a grand ancient tower and humble rural villages, speaks to the pervasive nature of their reawakening. They weren't just in one place, they were everywhere, a creeping shadow across the land. What truly galvanized them, though, was a shared purpose: vengeance. They rallied under the banner of the Gloam-Eyed Queen's forgotten creed. Remember her? The Empyrean who wielded destined death, the very concept of mortality, before Malekith, Marika's shadow, sealed it away. The Godskins saw the shattering not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to restore their queen's rightful place, to unleash destined death upon the world once more. They sought to reclaim their lost glory, to punish those who had usurped their power, and to bathe the lands between in the black flame of their goddess. This wasn't just about power, it was about theological purification, a cleansing fire to burn away the Golden Order's perceived heresy. And who were the primary targets of this vengeful crusade? The demigods, Marika's children, her direct lineage, the very embodiment of the Golden Order's broken legacy. The Godskins viewed them as heirs to Marika's heresy, living blasphemies who needed to be purged. I think this is a crucial point. It wasn't just about killing powerful individuals. It was about symbolically dismantling the Golden Order piece by piece, starting with its most prominent figures. Each demigod slain was a blow against Marika, a step closer to restoring the Gloam-Eyed Queen's dominion. One of the earliest and most audacious strikes came from a Godskin Apostle who managed to infiltrate the divine tower of Liurnia. This isn't just any tower, it's a place of arcane knowledge, a sanctuary for scholars, and crucially, the resting place for Ranni's great rune. The Apostle, driven by an unholy zeal, cut down the scholars who guarded this sacred relic. Why Ranni's rune specifically? I theorize it's because Ranni herself is an Empyrean, a direct rival to the Gloam-Eyed Queen in terms of divine potential. By targeting her rune, the Godskins weren't just causing chaos, they were making a statement, challenging the very foundation of divine authority in the lands between. The act itself was a desecration, a clear message that no place, no relic, no life was safe from their renewed wrath. But their ambition didn't stop there. A Godskin noble, a more imposing and perhaps even more fanatical variant of their kind, was dispatched to Volcano Manor. This is Rykard's domain, a place already steeped in blasphemy and rebellion against the Golden Order. You might think this is an odd target, given Rykard's own anti-Golden Order stance. However, I believe the Godskins weren't looking for allies. They were looking to claim Rykard's blasphemous power for themselves, to harness his defiance for their own ends. Imagine the sheer audacity, walking into the lair of a demigod who is fused with a god-devouring serpent and trying to assert dominance. It speaks volumes about their unwavering conviction and their belief in the absolute supremacy of the Black Flame. They weren't just seeking to destroy, they were seeking to absorb, to corrupt, to twist existing power structures, to serve their own dark goddess. And then, in a move that demonstrates their utter contempt for the Golden Order's sacred tenets, the Godskins targeted the walking mausoleums. These colossal, ambulatory structures house the soulless demigods, those who were deemed unworthy of resurrection or proper burial, their bodies preserved as empty vessels. The Godskins, with their penchant for flaying and their devotion to destined death, attempted to defile these entombed figures. This wasn't about power. It was about desecration. It was a direct affront to the Golden Order's funerary rites, a symbolic act of spitting on the memory of Marika's lineage. They weren't just killing the living, they were tormenting the dead, ensuring that even in oblivion, the demigods would know no peace. It's a chilling reminder of their fanaticism, a testament to how deeply they believed in their queen's cause. The Altus Plateau, a region often seen as the heartland of the Golden Order, also became a battleground. Here, a Godskin duo, two of these terrifying zealots working in tandem, ambushed a caravan. This wasn't just any caravan, it was transporting a demigod's remains. Think about the implications. Even in death, the demigods couldn't escape the Godskins' wrath. This ambush wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a calculated move to prevent the proper burial or resurrection of a demigod, further disrupting the Golden Order's spiritual infrastructure. The sheer audacity of two individuals taking on an armed caravan speaks to their formidable combat prowess and their absolute fearlessness in the face of overwhelming odds. They were a force of nature, a harbinger of doom, and their actions sent shockwaves through the already fractured lands between. These relentless attacks had a predictable yet devastating consequence. They disrupted the fragile truce between the surviving demigods. In the wake of the shattering, the various factions were already at each other's throats, but the Godskins' indiscriminate aggression exacerbated the war. It was like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. The demigods, instead of uniting against this common, ancient enemy, found themselves further entrenched in their own petty squabbles, each vying for power while the Godskins chipped away at their foundations. This, I believe, was a deliberate strategy. Sow discord, weaken the enemy from within, and then strike when they are at their most vulnerable. The Godskins were not just warriors, they were shrewd strategists, exploiting the chaos for their own nefarious ends. Even Leyndell, the royal capital, the very seat of the Golden Order's power, wasn't safe. A faction of Godskins, emboldened by their successes and the capital's evident weakness, laid siege to its formidable defenses. This was a bold move, a direct challenge to the heart of Marika's dominion. Post-shattering, Leyndell's defenses were already strained, its forces depleted, and its morale flagging. The Godskins, sensing this vulnerability, pressed their advantage, testing the capital's weakened bulwarks. While they may not have breached the inner sanctum, the very act of besieging Leyndell sent a clear message. Nowhere was safe. The Golden Order, once thought impregnable, was now bleeding, and the Godskins were there to twist the knife. And what fueled this resurgence, this terrifying new chapter in their history? The Black Flame. Once suppressed by Malekith, the rune of death had been bound, its power sealed away. But with the shattering, with the very fabric of reality tearing apart, the rune of death began to unbind. Its power, the very essence of mortality, started to regain its potency. This wasn't just a magical effect. I believe it was a spiritual awakening, a cosmic shift that empowered the Godskins and their devotion to the Gloam-Eyed Queen. The Black Flame, their sacred fire, grew stronger, its destructive potential unleashed upon a world ill-equipped to handle it. In the desolate, snow-capped peaks of the mountaintops of the giants, a place steeped in ancient power and forgotten lore, Godskin Apostles performed dark rituals. These weren't just simple prayers, these were elaborate, blood-soaked ceremonies designed to reignite their connection to destined death. They sought to fully unleash its power, to become conduits for its destructive force. I imagine these rituals were gruesome, involving sacrifices and incantations, all aimed at drawing forth the raw, unbridled power of mortality itself. This was their ultimate goal, to bring about a new age, an age of the Black Flame, where destined death reigned supreme and the Golden Order was utterly annihilated. Their devotion was absolute, their methods terrifying, and their ambition boundless. The stage was set for a truly devastating conflict, one that would redefine the very nature of life and death in the lands between. But what really is a resurgence without a little internal conflict, right? As we move into the next chapter of their chaotic return, we find the Godskins, emboldened and seemingly unstoppable, clashing not just with the remnants of the Golden Order, but with other ancient powers. It's here on the very outskirts of the crumbling Farum Azula that we see the Godskins meet their match, or at least a significant challenge, in the form of Malekith's Black Blade kindred. I think this is a critical detail, one that often gets overlooked. You see, the kindred, those gargantuan winged beasts wielding Malekith's very essence, were likely dispatched to contain the black flame itself to prevent its spread. They are, after all, extensions of Malekith's will, bound to his duty. The imagery here is striking. Two forces of primordial destruction, one seeking to reignite an ancient fire, the other desperately trying to keep it contained. I theorize that these skirmishes weren't just random encounters. They were strategic engagements, a desperate attempt by Malekith's forces to prevent the black flame from reaching its full, unholy potential. Imagine the sheer, raw power of these confrontations, the air thick with the scent of burning flesh and the roar of ancient magic. It's a testament to the Godskins' renewed strength that they could even stand against such formidable foes, let alone engage them in sustained conflict. This isn't just a minor skirmish, it's a proxy war for the fate of a fundamental force in the lands between. Speaking of spreading influence, their resurgence wasn't confined to grand epic battles. It seeped into the very fabric of the lands between, corrupting from within. Consider the chilling tale of the Windmill Village in Altus Plateau. This was a place of innocent, if somewhat macabre, celebration where villagers danced and flayed the skin of giants, a ritual born from ancient traditions. But then, a Godskin noble arrives. This isn't just any noble. This is a master manipulator, a priest of the Black Flame, and they don't just conquer, they corrupt. They twist the existing traditions, transforming the celebrants from those who merely flayed giants into fervent, skin-flaying cultists devoted to the Godskin Apostles and their dark deity. I believe this act is profoundly indicative of the Godskins' methods. They don't always need to raise and destroy. Sometimes they prefer to subtly infiltrate, to poison the wellspring of local culture, turning existing practices into grotesque parodies of their former selves. It's a more insidious form of conquest, one that leaves a lasting scar on the very soul of a community. The Windmill Village, once a place of strange but harmless festivity, becomes a horrifying testament to the Godskins' ability to pervert and control. It's a slow, creeping horror, far more unsettling than an outright siege. This transformation, I think, highlights their understanding of human nature, of how easily belief can be warped and redirected. But the Godskins weren't the only ones doing the capturing and corrupting. There are always bigger fish, even in the lands between. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, a demigod who had embraced the great serpent and sought to devour the very gods themselves, found himself drawn to the black flame. It's a delicious irony, isn't it? A demigod seeking to become a god by devouring other gods, now seeking the power of a god-slaying flame. Rykard, ever the opportunist, captures a Godskin apostle. This wasn't for punishment, no, not in the traditional sense. Rykard wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in power. He subjected this apostle to unspeakable tortures, not to break their spirit, but to extract their secrets. He wanted to learn the mysteries of the black flame, to understand its properties, its origins, its application. I theorize that Rykard saw the black flame as a potential weapon against the Erd Tree and the Greater Will, another tool in his blasphemous arsenal. This act, I believe, speaks volumes about the perceived power of the black flame. If a demigod as formidable and ruthless as Rykard was willing to go to such lengths to acquire its knowledge, then its destructive potential must have been truly immense. It also shows the vulnerability of even the most devout Godskin. Their faith, while strong, did not make them immune to the cruel machinations of a demigod. The implications are profound. Even as the Godskins were rising, their power was coveted and their knowledge exploited. Naturally, such a resurgence, such a widespread reemergence of a god-slaying power, could not go unnoticed by the Greater Will and its emissaries. The two fingers, those enigmatic conduits of the outer gods, took notice, and when they take notice, they act. They dispatched their shadow-bound assassins, those mysterious wolf-like figures, to deal with the Godskin threat. This is a direct response, a clear indication that the Godskins were now considered a significant enough threat to warrant intervention from the highest echelons of the Golden Order's power structure. I think this is where we see the true scale of the Godskins' impact. They weren't just a localized problem, they were a systemic threat. The shadow-bound assassins, often associated with the demigods and their protectors, were now being deployed against these ancient priests. It elevates the conflict, making it clear that this wasn't just a matter of regional unrest. It was a battle for the very soul of the lands between, a struggle between cosmic forces. It also raises the question, why shadow-bound assassins? Is it because they are particularly effective against the black flame, or because their discreet nature allowed the two fingers to maintain a semblance of control and secrecy around this burgeoning threat? I lean towards the latter. The Greater Will rarely likes to show its hand directly unless absolutely necessary. But the Godskins weren't just fighting. They were also symbolically dismantling the Golden Order's authority. At the Church of Vows, a place of historical significance where Marika herself had made pacts and pronouncements, a Godskin apostle committed an act of deliberate desecration. They burned the records, specifically the records of Marika's pact with the fire giants. This wasn't just an act of vandalism, it was a carefully chosen target. The pact with the fire giants was a foundational moment in the Golden Order's history, a moment where Marika, in her wisdom or perhaps her ambition, had subjugated a powerful ancient race. By burning these records, the Godskin wasn't just destroying paper, they were attempting to erase history, to undermine the very legitimacy of Marika's rule, and by extension, the Golden Order itself. I believe this act was a declaration, a statement that the old order was crumbling, and the Godskins were there to hasten its demise. It's a powerful symbolic gesture, one that resonates with the core tenets of their faith, the destruction of the gods and their dominion. It's an act of defiance, a clear challenge to the narrative of the Golden Order. Their destructive campaign continued, spreading terror and chaos across the land. The Godskins' raids on minor Erdtree sanctuaries were particularly effective in this regard. These sanctuaries, often small and lightly defended, were vital spiritual centers for the remaining clergy and devout followers of the Golden Order. When the Godskins attacked, they weren't just seeking to plunder, they were seeking to instill fear, to demonstrate the impotence of the Erdtree's protection. Imagine the horror of the priests and priestesses watching as their sacred spaces were defiled, their altars consumed by the black flame. These raids weren't about grand strategic victories, they were about psychological warfare, about breaking the morale of the faithful. I think this strategy was incredibly effective in sowing discord and doubt. If even the sacred sanctuaries of the Erd Tree couldn't withstand the Godskins, what hope did the common folk have? It's a chilling thought, and one that undoubtedly contributed to the widespread despair that gripped the lands between during this chaotic period. These weren't just attacks, they were statements, declarations of a new, terrifying power. And speaking of insidious influence, the Godskins' reach even extended into the heart of the Golden Order's power, Lindell. A secret sect of Godskin worshippers emerged among the perfumers of the royal capital. This is fascinating to me because it shows the subtle, almost invisible ways in which the Godskins could gain adherents. The perfumers, often associated with healing and subtle arts, were now drawn to the raw, destructive power of the black flame. What drew them? Was it disillusionment with the Golden Order? A desire for power? Or perhaps a fascination with the forbidden knowledge that the Godskins possessed? I theorize that the perfumers, with their knowledge of rare ingredients and their skill in crafting potent concoctions, saw in the black flame a new, terrifying avenue for their craft. Perhaps they sought to harness its power, to infuse their perfumes with its destructive essence. This infiltration, I believe, speaks to the pervasive nature of the Godskins' influence. They weren't just a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield, they were a cult, a movement that could attract followers from all walks of life, even those who seemed least likely to embrace such a dark path. It's a testament to the seductive power of forbidden knowledge and the allure of radical change. But what about the heart of their power? Where did the Godskins truly establish their dominion? It's in the crumbling Farum Azula, that ancient, storm-ravaged city, that we find the Godskin duo. Those two formidable figures, a noble and an apostle, occupied the very temple of the ancient dragon cult, defiling its altars with their black flame rituals. This isn't just an occupation, it's a symbolic conquest. The dragon cult, a power that predated the Erd Tree and held immense significance, was now being desecrated by the very forces that sought to undo all gods. I think this act is a clear statement of intent. The Godskins were not just content to fight the Golden Order, they were asserting their dominance over all ancient powers, even those that had long been dormant or subjugated. The crumbling Farum Azula, a place steeped in the history of dragons and their gods, became a stage for the Godskins' ultimate blasphemy. It's a power play, a declaration that they were now the dominant force of destruction, capable of defiling even the most sacred of ancient sites. The irony, of course, is that Farum Azula is also the prison of Malekith, the very being tasked with containing the black flame. Their presence there is a direct challenge, a taunt even, to the beast clergyman. Speaking of Malekith, his patience was clearly wearing thin. The widespread resurgence of the black flame, the defilement of ancient sites, and the sheer audacity of the Godskins eventually forced his hand. He personally hunted a Godskin apostle in Caelid. This isn't a Black Blade kindred. This is Malekith himself, the Empyrean's shadow, the Blade of Death. This is a direct intervention, a sign of just how serious the threat had become. He didn't just defeat the apostle, he left the wounded beastman to rot in Gaia, a stark warning to any who would dare wield the forbidden flame. I believe this act was a desperate attempt to stem the tide, to remind the Godskins of the true power that lay dormant, waiting to be unleashed. It's a moment of raw, unbridled power, a brutal display of force designed to instill fear and deter further aggression. The fact that Malekith, who is supposed to be guarding death, would personally intervene speaks volumes about the perceived danger of the Godskins. It also highlights the sheer resilience of the Godskin Apostles. To even survive an encounter with Malekith, however wounded, is a testament to their strength and devotion. This was a direct, visceral confrontation between the forces of containment and the forces of chaos. Their ambition, however, knew no bounds. The Godskins even attempted to flay the dormant demigod within the walking mausoleum near Castle Sol. This is an incredible act of hubris, a direct assault on the very essence of the demigods. The walking mausoleums, those colossal, ambulatory structures, house the soulless bodies of demigods, preserved and protected. The Godskins, in their fervent desire to consume the flesh of gods, sought to flay even these dormant, lifeless forms. I think this shows their ultimate goal, to eradicate all traces of divinity, even those that are merely echoes of a former glory. It's a symbolic act, a ritualistic defilement of what remains of the golden lineage. The sheer scale of this endeavor, attempting to breach and flay a demigod within one of these moving fortresses, speaks to their unwavering zeal and their growing confidence. It's a chilling thought, these figures attempting to skin a being that is already, in a sense, soulless. It's an act of ultimate blasphemy, pushing the boundaries of what was considered sacred and inviolable. But even the Godskins, for all their power and conviction, could make mistakes. Their black flame rituals, performed with increasing frequency and intensity, had an unforeseen and terrifying consequence. They accidentally awakened dormant deathbirds across the lands between. The deathbirds, those spectral, fire-wielding creatures, are tied to the ancient rites of death, predating the Erd Tree's influence. By invoking the black flame, the Godskins inadvertently stirred these ancient spirits, unleashing a new wave of terror upon the land. I believe this is a crucial detail, showcasing that even the most powerful forces can have unintended consequences. The Godskins sought to wield death, but in doing so, they awoke an even older, more primal form of it. It's a moment of ironic comeuppance, now where their own dark magic turns against them, or at least against the stability of the lands between. This accidental awakening, I think, underscores the chaotic nature of their power. It's a force that, once unleashed, can have ripple effects far beyond their immediate control. It also adds another layer of complexity to the already fractured landscape, introducing yet another ancient threat. And just as the Godskins sought to flay others, they too became targets. A Godskin noble, perhaps one of the more audacious or overconfident, was lured into Mogwyn Palace. There they met a gruesome end, flayed by Mog's blood cultists. This is another fascinating intersection of dark powers. Mog, the Lord of Blood, with his own twisted ambitions and his devotion to an outer god, saw in the Godskin noble not a threat to be eliminated, but a source of power to be consumed. I theorize that Mog's cultists, with their mastery of blood magic, saw the black flame as a potential complement to their own powers, or perhaps they simply sought to absorb the noble's strength. It's a brutal end, a taste of their own medicine, and it serves as a grim reminder that in the lands between, even the most powerful can fall prey to those with different, equally horrifying agendas. This event, I believe, highlights the internal struggles and rivalries among the various dark factions, demonstrating that the Godskins were not universally feared or respected by all malevolent forces. It's a complex web of power where even the hunters can become the hunted. Finally, the widespread and increasingly aggressive activities of the Godskins prompted a significant response from the remaining Carian royals. They reinforced Raya Lucaria's wards, those powerful magical defenses that protected the Academy from external threats. This isn't a direct confrontation, but a defensive measure, a recognition of the Godskins' growing power and the threat they posed to even the most magically fortified locations. I think this action speaks volumes about the Godskins' reach. If the Carian royals, known for their powerful sorcery and their relative isolation, felt the need to strengthen their defenses, then the Godskins were clearly seen as a major, pervasive threat. It's a testament to the fear and uncertainty they instilled across the lands between, forcing even the most powerful factions to take preventative measures. This reinforcement, I believe, was a direct response to the escalating chaos, a desperate attempt to protect one of the last bastions of organized power from the encroaching darkness. The Godskins, in their relentless pursuit of god-slaying, were forcing the hand of even the most reclusive and powerful entities, setting the stage for even greater conflicts to come. But their ambitions, as we'll soon discover, were often met with formidable resistance. Moving further into the post-shattering chaos, we find the Godskins attempting to consolidate their power, but their efforts were far from universally successful. Consider the chilling scene at the consecrated snowfield, a desolate, unforgiving expanse. Here, a Godskin apostle, perhaps one of the more fanatical devotees, undertook a desperate, ill-fated ritual. I theorize this was an attempt to resurrect the Gloam-Eyed Queen herself, or at the very least, to channel her power directly. The sheer audacity of such an endeavor speaks volumes about their unwavering faith, even in the face of their deity's long-presumed demise. This wasn't merely a prayer, it was a grand, macabre performance, likely involving the flaying of countless victims to create the grotesque tapestries of skin that are their hallmark. The sheer scale of such a ritual, in such a remote and dangerous location, suggests a profound desperation, a last-ditch effort to reignite their fading glory. It's possible that they believed the raw, untamed essence of the snowfield, so far removed from the Golden Order's influence, was a more fertile ground for such dark magic. But as we know, the queen remained dormant, a testament to Marika's enduring power, or perhaps simply the irreversible nature of her defeat. The failure of this ritual, I believe, was a significant blow to Godskin morale, a stark reminder that even their most fervent devotion couldn't always bend reality to their will. It likely pushed them further into the shadows, forcing them to reconsider their more overt strategies. Speaking of resistance, the Godskins' assaults on the Haligtree, Miquella's refuge, were met with an equally fierce, if not more organized, defense. The Haligtree, a sanctuary for the downtrodden and the outcast, was not without its protectors. The Cleanrout Knights, loyal to Millennia, the Blade of Miquella, stood as an unyielding bulwark against any who would threaten their beloved Empyrean. These knights, afflicted by the Scarlet Rot, but fighting with unwavering resolve, were formidable adversaries. Their unique fighting style, a blend of martial prowess and the insidious power of the Rot, would have been a stark contrast to the Black Flame's swift, burning strikes. I imagine the clashes were brutal,